Chapter 681. The Illusioned Monstrosity. Northern still couldn't understand how the mere presence of a calamitous Belial would be so threatening when he had fought an apex Belial before. He stood there, frozen in sight, chaos eyes locked at the creature in front of him, which with every second seemed to phase in and out of existence. Its manifestation alone was an utter confusion. Suddenly the creature seemed to move. Hell, he didn't even know. Before he could act, the creature blurred, splitting into a dozen identical copies that surrounded him. Each figure shimmered faintly, their forms bleeding into the shadows like apparitions. Northern's chaos eyes scanned the copies, but their rapid shifts and distortions made it impossible, even for chaos eyes, to pinpoint the real one. The illusions attacked in unison, tendrils of shadow lashing out with precision. Northern spilled into mirages of himself, dodging the attack. The attack was a bit challenging. At first, all others looked like an illusion, but then they looked real yet again. However, Northern could at least make out with chaos eyes the reason. The real attack itself was shifting across several other illusions of it as they all lunged towards him. And that was why he decided that using mirage was the best shot he got. Northern's glowing eyes narrowed as each of his mirages mirrored his movements perfectly, moving in erratic and unpredictable patterns that matched the chaos of the illusions surrounding him. The creature's tendrils recoiled momentarily, sensing the confusion in its prey. Its shifting form paused, as if recalibrating, before the dozen copies launched another assault. Shadow tendrils struck at each of Northern's mirages, their speed and precision cutting through the distorted space with terrifying efficiency. Northern smirked, his chaos eyes flickering as something registered in them. There was something the monster was doing, something very smart. One of the shadow tendrils lashed toward a mirage, but instead of dispersing like an illusion, it met cold resistance. Northern's real form materialized behind the attack, his twin-bladed staff, Grenger, spinning in a whirlwind of motion. The weapon's blackened edges hummed with void essence, slicing through the tendril with a screeching howl. The severed shadow recoiled, dissipating into the air, but the illusions around Northern didn't falter. Instead, they seemed to double in intensity, shifting even faster, their attacks merging and overlapping like a storm of chaos. Northern gritted his teeth as he dashed between the attacks, his movements seamless and calculated. Mirage gave him the edge he needed, his afterimages acting as decoys while he analyzed the creature's patterns. Each flicker of the shadowy tendrils left faint ripples in the air, distortions only his chaos eyes could detect. Northern frowned as they locked onto the faintest delay in one of the attacks. He twisted his body mid-air, void wings flaring to propel him faster, and slammed Grenger into one of the illusions. The impact sent a shockwave rippling outward, and the illusion shattered like glass, revealing a faint glimpse of the true creature within. The shifting entity screeched, its distorted copies flickering as the pressure of Northern's attack destabilized its hold on reality. Northern didn't hesitate. He surged forward, his void wings slicing through the air as he closed the distance between himself and the weakened core of the entity. Chaos eyes burned brightly, peeling back the layers of the creature's deception. It was still shifting, its form blurring and phasing in and out of existence, but Northern could see the threads holding it together, a network of essence binding the illusions to the real monster. The creature was adaptive and deceptive, but unfortunately for the illusion monster, there was no way its form would keep up with Northern. He hurled Grenger again, the weapon spinning like a black comet toward the core. The creature reacted, tendrils weaving a protective barrier of shadow around itself, but Northern had already seen the move, a couple of seconds before. He vanished in a flicker of speed, appearing above the entity, void feathers raining down like a storm of razor-sharp blades. The shadow barrier cracked under the relentless assault, and the creature let out a guttural roar. Its shifting form spasmed violently, and for the first time, Northern could see it fully. Its true body was grotesque, a mass of warped flesh and shadow, its surface rippling with countless shifting faces and limbs. Each movement it made seemed to tear at the fabric of reality, its presence alone a corruption of existence. Finally, Northern whispered, his eyes locking onto the core pulsating deep within the monstrosity. But the creature wasn't done. In a desperate act, it unleashed a wave of pure distortion, the air around it warping and bending as reality itself seemed to fold. Chaos eyes flared as the wave washed over him, his surroundings dissolving into a maelstrom of incomprehensible shapes and sounds. For a moment, he was disoriented, his mind grappling with the sheer magnitude of the attack. The creature had turned the battlefield into a realm of pure illusion, where even his chaos eyes struggled to discern reality from deception. Northern steadied himself, cold fog dissipating around him as void aura emanated from him calmly like a beacon in the chaos. The tendrils of distortion reached for him, but he pushed them back with a tremendous release of void aura. Soon, however, chaos eyes began to adapt, tracing the faint threads that connected the illusions to the creature's core. With the taut connection of the threads to the monster, Northern immediately knew what to do. Although it was only a premonition, Northern shot forward, his void wings propelling him even farther forward as he dodged the creature's relentless attacks. His eyes locked onto the threads of energy, and with each strike of Granger, he severed them one by one. The creature howled, its form destabilizing with each thread that broke. The illusions around Northern flickered and faded, revealing the cavern's true form once more. The creature's grotesque body trembled, its tendrils lashing out wildly in desperation. Northern ascended into the air, his wings spreading wide as he gathered his essence for a final strike. The feathers on his wings sharpened, glowing faintly with void essence as they coalesced into a single massive spear of destruction. "I wonder what will happen if I do this," Northern said, his voice cold and final. He hurled the spear with all his might and muttered, "Echo!" The weapon pierced through the creature's core. The spear tore through the creature's core, its trajectory leaving a trail of warped space in its wake. As it struck, the cavern trembled violently, the oppressive weight of the creature's essence collapsing into a deafening roar. Northern's voice echoed, calm and resolute amidst the chaos. "Let's see if you can adapt to this." The spear unleashed its power in an eruption of essence, a pulsating shockwave radiating outward as the attack registered on the monster's body like a connection of combos. The threads connecting the illusions to the core frayed and snapped in rapid succession, unraveling the creature's intricate web of deception. Its grotesque form convulsed, the shifting faces and limbs melting into a swirling mass of shadow. The creature let out a final, guttural screech, its body disintegrating into countless fragments of shimmering darkness that dissipated into the air. The cavern was bathed in silence, save for the faint hum of Northern's void aura. He landed softly, his wings folding behind him, the glow of his chaos eyes dimming slightly as he scanned the remnants of the battlefield. His gaze was sharp and calculating as he surveyed the area for a couple of seconds. Then he sighed and dissolved his wings. Then, the momentary stillness was shattered. From the shadows where the creature had fallen, a faint, eerie ripple spread through the cavern. Northern's eyes narrowed as the ripple expanded, coalescing into a faint, translucent figure. The figure shifted erratically, its form unstable, as if it struggled to hold itself together. "What is this? A second form?" He cursed with a deep frown on his face. The translucent figure spoke, its voice dissonant and layered, like 1,000 whispers colliding. "Who are you? This is a layer that should be impossible to reach." It hissed, its form solidifying momentarily into something vaguely humanoid before collapsing back into chaotic motion. "I don't perceive the heritage. You must be an anomaly." Northern's stance shifted, his fingers tightening around Granger. "What the hell? Since when did a monster start speaking?" This wasn't even monster language. It was clear scholastic tongue. That is, whoever the speaking monster was did not just know how to speak their language, but had studied rich in it. The figure lunged forward, its movements so erratic and fast that even Northern's chaos eyes struggled to track it. Tendrils of translucent energy lashed out, not physical this time, but aimed directly at his soul. Northern felt the impact, not on his body but deep within, as though the essence of the attack was tearing at the edges of his being. Fortunately for him, he was resistant to soul attacks, although he still felt his soul tremble at the impact nonetheless. The creature's translucent form twisted, the remnants of its voice echoing in the cavern. "What a peculiar one you are. But your strength is meaningless against what you cannot touch." Chapter 682. The Reality Trap, Part 1. This is very strange. Perhaps you are not yet able to comprehend how strange. The creature paused, drawing a deep and insightful gaze into Northern's soul through his eyes. He was never supposed to make it this far, not to say an anomaly. Northern raised a brow. Make it this far? More like to the entrance? I understand that humor is a part of human nature, so it does not irritate me at all. Much less a lame attempt such as yours. As the creature spoke, its form shifted again, splitting into multiple translucent forms that danced erratically around the cavern. As much as I want to challenge your take on my sense of humor, I don't think that would be appropriate given this dire situation. What I'm trying to tell you is, I barely made it to the entrance, so it's kind of confusing when you say, made it this far. Silence subdued the atmosphere between them for a while. The illusioned creature's head, which could somehow now speak, slowly turned around the cavern expanse, as if inspecting something. Then its powerful voice pierced the silent darkness, making it throb rather than tear. "You are correct. The Hefter moved. I think you and I are going somewhere now." The Hefter was also what the creature was called, a calamitous Belial that powerful. Judging from the way you regard it, you are an external party. Who are you, and what did you do exactly? The creature paid no attention to Northern, instead moving around the cave, its illusions splitting out like mirages of movement. Each figure was barely distinguishable from the next, their movements defying logic. Northern stayed in peaceful silence, his eyes calm but his mind vehemently calculating what exactly could be at play here. From the way this person spoke, it should have been impossible for him to have met such a monster. And yet he did. According to the strange person, this meant that it somehow moved toward Northern instead of staying wherever it was supposed to stay while it waited for someone to reach for it. That meant he had something? Or the poor fella just got bored? The creature, after all, could have been staying here for decades without seeing a fighting partner once. Or maybe not. Maybe Ruffsberg made it down here too. Nah, I don't think so. Ruffsberg might be mad, but Northern did not think deciding to fight a Belial would be something he would be crazy enough to do. The last Belial he met was an entire room of Belial statue monsters that were not any less strong than their true form, the Crimson Lord seated in the middle. Although the Crimson Lord was far stronger, the others were a lot to deal with. And Northern was able to easily do away with them with the kind of talents he copied and how DIY made him able to dabble between talents however he wanted. Belials are supposed to be so strong that one of them is undefeatable, and as Northern saw, the apex of them is a convolution of all in one. He saw how Dante was powerless before them. Although Dante was obviously a new paragon, that did not mean that Ruffsberg, who has probably been a paragon for a longer time, would have it any easier. This is why he is so special. Thinking about him almost made him want to grin. Oh damn. I think I am the main character of this world. The creature finally detached from its momentary trance, its translucent form halting mid-air, its presence still erratic yet carrying an unnerving authority. It turned to Northern, its face, or whatever that was, twisting into something resembling curiosity. "You are an anomaly," it said, its voice like a whisper layered over a deep, guttural growl. "A broken thread in the tapestry of this world. That is why the Hefter moved. It sensed you." Northern's calm demeanor didn't falter, but his eyes glowed slightly as he analyzed the creature, searching for any clues to its true nature or intentions. "A broken thread?" he echoed. "You'll have to elaborate. I'm not exactly fluent in cryptic nonsense." The creature's form rippled, as though amused. "Your existence distorts the natural flow of things. You don't belong here, your talents, your abilities, your very essence. They bend the rules of this reality. You are the disruption." Northern raised an eyebrow, his grip tightening slightly on Granger. You're saying I'm special. Congratulations, you've caught up. Everyone else already knows. The creature tilted its head, its form glitching unnaturally as it hovered closer. Special is a wrong statement. Your soul composition and tapestry of existence do not align with what I have studied of many souls in this world. The creature's distorted laughter echoed through the cavern, reverberating like shattered glass. The Hefter merely recognized that irregularity and was resolved to destroy it. Unfortunately for it, the creature's voice took a low, somber dive before rising back to its usual tempo. Without further ado, I shall dispel you from this place. Northern's calm composure didn't falter outwardly, but his mind raced as he processed the creature's words. Dispel him? That wasn't happening, not now, not ever. His grip on Grenger tightened, and void aura began to ripple faintly around him, an ominous prelude. He was sure. This had to be the dungeon master or something. What he was not so sure about was this Milwa or someone else? The translucent creature's form shifted, glitching unnaturally as it expanded, towering over Northern. Its once humanoid features dissolved into a writhing mass of tendrils, jagged limbs, and fractured faces. The cavern itself seemed to bend and warp under the sheer pressure of its presence. Northern steadied his breath, repositioning and grounding himself. I admire your confidence. Anomaly? The creature said, its voice layered with mocking distortion. But confidence alone won't save you. Northern smirked, his eyes burning sharply as Chaos Eyes picked and locked onto the twisting ligatures of energy that held the creature's form together. Confidence, his voice echoed. No, I've got something better than that. The creature struck first, its tendrils lashing out with terrifying speed and precision. Northern blurred into motion, activating Mirage to split into afterimages. The tendrils smashed into the ground and walls, leaving behind faint ripples in the air, but none touched him. Northern retaliated with a sweep of Grenger, void energy crackling along the twin blades as they carved through two tendrils. The severed limbs dissolved into translucent mist, but the creature didn't falter. Instead, it shifted, its form glitching and multiplying into a dozen identical figures. Each figure moved erratically, their movements defying logic as they darted around the cavern. They attacked in unison, tendrils weaving through the air like a storm of chaos. Northern's afterimages mirrored his movements, darting and twisting through the onslaught, but even he could feel the increasing complexity of the attacks. The creature's distorted voice echoed from every corner of the cavern. You can't outpace me, Anomaly. I've analyzed your every move. Northern paid no heed to the monster's words. Instead, his mind was sharpened, racing productively as he dodged another barrage of tendrils. This wasn't just brute force. The creature was calculating his movements, countering his strategies in real time. His Chaos Eyes helped him predict a miniature future, and he devised his entire attacks around the future he predicted. But the monster was bashing every one of his attacks and destroying them with so much ease that he questioned if the monster also had greater foresight. But he just had to really believe what the sentient being had said. It was indeed analyzing every single one of his movements, and has probably analyzed that he had foresight too. Northern decided to stop using the foresight for a while. Instead, Chaos Eyes locked onto the threads connecting the figures, tracing them back to a single pulsating core hidden within the swirling mass. So, you're playing Puppet Master, Northern muttered, his smirk returning. Let's see how well you fight without strings. He hurled Grenger toward the core, the weapon spinning like a black comet. But before it could strike, one of the creature's figures intercepted it, its tendrils wrapping around the weapon and stopping it midair. Did you really think it would be that easy? The creature sneered. Northern's void wings exploded out of his back, launching him forward in a blur of speed. He reached for Grenger, but before he could reclaim it, the creature's core pulsed with a wave of energy. The cavern warped around him, his surroundings dissolving into a kaleidoscope of distorted shapes and colors. For a moment, Northern lost his footing, his senses overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the illusion. The creature's voice echoed in his mind, mocking and cold. You can't defeat what you can't perceive. Northern steadied himself and tried to use Void Aura to push back against the illusion. But it was effortless. Never in his life had he ever seen an illusion so perfectly woven that its ligatures merged seamlessly into reality. This one was not like the former, not even the reality that limitless void created could measure up. This time he might really be trapped. Chapter 683, Crude Extermination. The distorted reality twisted around Northern, folding and unfurling like waves of dark waters, each shift blurring the line between illusion and truth. The colors clashed violently, shapes rippling with jagged unpredictability, and even his chaos eyes struggled to pierce the veil. For the first time in a long while, Northern felt the faint touch of doubt creep into his mind. This was different. The creature wasn't just weaving illusions, it was rewriting the rules of the space entirely. Trapped? Anomaly? The creature's voice oozed from every direction, dripping with malice. You've danced long enough. Now you'll be unmade. Northern exhaled, forcing the doubt down. The void aura around him pulsed faintly as he anchored himself mentally and physically. He couldn't allow this illusion to consume him. He wasn't the prey here. Northern frowned darkly for a couple of seconds. Then his voice came, cutting through the distorted reality like a blade. You are so full of crap. You managed to weave a few things well for once, and now you're feeling like you're making this harder than it needs to be. Why don't you just die so I can continue my exploration? This is me asking nicely. The creature laughed, the sound like a fractured chorus of mockery. No words from it followed Northern's words. It seemed the sentient being behind the moving illusion monster was very aware of this person's mental state. Northern sounded and looked crazy. All the odds were stacked against him. This wasn't a mere illusion. The creature had seen what the Hefter's illusion did to him. Northern had to reasonably expend himself to undo the illusion. And this one was much worse. This one, the sentient being himself, had rewritten fabrics of reality. An ability so high it should belong to the gods of this world, if only any existed. Northern's speed antics that revealed the weakness of the other illusion were going to be useless here. You can never get out of this place. If what gives you so much assurance is that you can always try that trickery again, I am inclined to let you know you will fail. This place will be your grave. I personally will see to it. As the monster had said, along with Northern, both of them were currently standing meters apart in the shifting waters. All four eyes of chaos darted in different directions within each eye, seeking a way out of the illusion. But it was to no avail. Chaos Eyes really was helpless before this one. Northern was amazed and terrified at the same time. Both emotions brought him genuine enjoyment. But he still had to get out of the illusion somehow. A wide grin slowly crept up Northern's face. This caused the monster's constantly distorting face to twist with confusion. You smile at the face of death? How astonishing! The only reason why I am smiling is because I'm not here alone. Northern gestured with his hands, shrugging smugly. If you are here with me, that means I can deal with this thing by dealing with you. Which is, by the way, a piece of cake. The creature's voice echoed, mockery layered within its words. Look at this anomaly. This is the strength of intelligence unbound. A perfect illusion that even your magnificent eyes cannot unravel. If you are thinking defeating me will put an end to this truth, then you have already lost before this fight even begins. The twisted landscape shifted again, the walls rippling as if alive. Tendrils of translucent energy shot out from every direction, moving unpredictably and forcing Northern to act on instinct alone. He dodged with quick bursts, but each evasion felt closer than the last. Northern had looked at all the rest of Dante's talent abilities. They all worked around speed and afterimages and were totally useless in this scenario. All his talents were actually useless, maybe except a single one. A single one that Northern had been hoping he wouldn't have to use. But now it wasn't looking like he had any choice. Northern appeared in several afterimages as he sank into the shadows, appearing here and there, dodging the strikes of tendrils. He then managed to land. Immediately, His eyes flared with a red light that burned viciously for a millisecond, almost filling the entire illusionscape before dying out. Lock! Then something unexpected began to happen. The creature was unsure at first. All it noticed was that its head was shifting rigorously, phasing into blurs. Slowly, its control on the monster's entirety seemed to be going out of hand. To make it worse, the illusioned world was breaking. "You imbecile! What have you done?" Northern grinned. "I had my doubts, but looks like it does work on monsters." He had thought before that erasure would only work on people with talents. But now that it was working on monsters as well, Northern suspected it affected one's core more than it affected the talent itself. No doubt, this talent was his greatest trump card. That is what makes him very hesitant to use it. He did not want to always resort to locking an opponent's talent except when absolutely necessary. And to him right now, locking the monster's ability was him admitting that with this ability, defeating the monster might not be possible. He did not want to defeat anyone or any creature by having to resort to locking out its talent. He already had the advantage of more than one talent. Wasn't it unfair to his opponent if he locked out the only one they had? This was why he didn't use erasure, even though he could have easily used it to defeat certain adversaries that he faced. The world of shifting illusions cracked and splintered, jagged lines tearing through the distorted reality. Northern stood firm, watching with a faint but dangerous blue light in his eyes as the monstrous figure before him writhed uncontrollably. The creature's translucent tendrils spasmed and faltered, its control over the illusion crumbling with each passing second. "You mongrel! What have you done?" The creature hissed, its voice distorted with fury. Its form flickered violently, as though fighting to maintain its shape. Northern grinned wider, his chaos eyes glowing faintly as he tilted his head. "Who knew locking your abilities could have so much adverse effect on your entire existence?" The illusion shattered further, fragments of the fake reality falling away like shards of glass. The cavern slowly reasserted itself, its jagged walls glowing faintly with an eerie, natural luminescence. The oppressive weight of the illusion was gone, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. The creature stumbled forward, its massive, grotesque form reduced to something more primal, more tangible. It still held an aura of menace, but with the control of sanity slipping through the hands of whatever that sentient being was, it was less threatening and vulnerable. "You sly anomaly! Don't you dare think gimmicks would be enough to defeat me. This is merely a temporary break." The creature growled, its distorted face twisting with rage. "I am still your death, anomaly." Northern rolled his shoulders, spinning Granger lazily in his hand. "You're welcome," he said, his voice dripping with casual defiance. "But let's be honest, you were scarier when you could not talk." With that, the monster's corpse dropped to the ground, and Northern could finally hear the sound of the system. "You have slain a calamitous Belial, Hefter. You have gained 12 talent fragments. For the amount of work I did, twice even, this reward suddenly feels so low." Just as he was complaining, a strange thing happened. The system's voice came again. "You have received a new item." Northern froze. He was so shocked that his senses felt like they went blank for a moment. "Received a new item? Are you sure you are talking to me?" That was, after all, not something that happened enough to be regarded as not frequently. In fact, since he took on the vestige of the Chaos Prince, Northern could count how many times he had gotten items. Although he had never really felt a pressing need for them, all he had within his utilization right now was more than enough for a proper dispensation of his might. Items were an addition to him. With or without them, he still remained as powerful. But certain things he did consider a bit differently, such as the unique ability of Soul Forge. He was dying to see what it would birth and how far he could go with it. Perhaps creating a weapon tied to one's soul would be possible? With joy leaking from his facial features, Northern raised his head and glanced around the cavern. Nothing was there anymore. The illusion monster and the being that hijacked its functionality after its first defeat were gone. Temporarily, at least. If he was the dungeon warden of a sort, Northern knew for sure their paths would still cross. Not even when he just got so interested in exploring this dungeon even more. Putting all those thoughts aside, Northern could wait no further to inspect the item he had received from killing a calamitous Belial. I'm sure it will be groundbreaking. Chapter 684, Illusioned Hefter. Northern steadied his breath as a new panel flew out before his face. Item. Name. Illusioned Hefter. Type. Weapon. Grade. Legendary. Order. 3. Description. Certain illusions that the Hefter was unable to create exist in this steel. It could create a world of stars today and create a dimension of destruction tomorrow. Northern's eyes slowly widened as he read through the lines of runes. His lips curled afterward. No less expected from defeating a Belial. The grade and effectiveness of many items received depended on the rank and danger level of the monster defeated. Scholars dedicated to studying rift science had proposed that the intensity of the battle, the origin of the monster, and the will of the monster also played significant roles in determining what grade and order of items drifters received. Northern had just randomly heard about that while growing up, so he didn't know enough to consider the notion thoroughly. But this sword and what it took to defeat the Hefter, especially after its senses had been hijacked by the dungeon warden, was backbreaking. So, seeing this sword like this, he didn't consider it so much of a wasted effort. He shifted his eyes away from the panel and traced them down to the sleek sword in his hands. The sword had no hand guard. Its silver hilt was engraved with what looked like a wavy dragon, then wrapped by white linen that extended downward. The blade had a neat and flawless surface, as if water had been forged into steel of silent destruction. Even in the darkness of the cave, Northern could clearly see the reflection of his radiant blue eyes, recognizing once again how resplendent they were. The blade felt light in his hands, almost weightless. He swung it sideways. A faint screech tinged at the tip of his ear as the blade parted through the wind. A satisfactory grin climbed his face, his eyes brimming. It's good. He needed a sword. Stainless was a good sword, no doubt, but he did not feel entirely comfortable using an Odachi. He had even proposed it to Byran before. The Sword King had vehemently refused to let Dark Mortal go, saying, "There's just something about that sword that sits well with me." He should have seen the sword that slayed him. Soul Taker was his favorite. The sword was a weapon that would forever be etched in the pages of his heart. While he felt pained about it being broken thanks to some damned Kirathon that just wouldn't die, he also acknowledged that the likes of Revunt and Byran are his void subordinates today thanks to its gruesome death. How strong must Soul Taker's wielder have been to be able to kill these people? Or perhaps wielders, Northern wondered. He sighed and went on to inspect the next part of the sword. The interesting part. Order ability. Illusion Sword. Blink. Whispers of Regret. Illusion Sword. This ability can be consciously activated. When used, the blade of the sword becomes invisible to the naked eye and can cast illusions of blades upon its target. Blink. You can blink out barrage, creating a better chance at counterattack. Whispers of Regret. With every missed swing is a faint whisper. This whisper can become so strong it can cause you to lose your senses and go berserk. Northern contorted his face in irritation when he saw the last runes of description. Now, that is one uncomfortable ability there. He glanced at it with disgust once more before dismissing the panel. Now that the strange anomaly had been dealt with, all he had to do was continue exploring the dungeon. His plan was to go as deep as he could, see what he could discover about the dungeon, and leave the rest to his clones and void summons. That meant that during the duration they would be exploring the dungeon, Northern would be left with no subordinates at his disposal. But he did not care about it. After all, there was a cause for him doing all of this. One last thing was there that he hoped would happen and at the same time not happen. He advanced down the cavern tunnel that was now looking like the disheveled bowels of a macabre. Broken stones and cracks marked the dark scenery, a morbid testimony that a terrifying fight had occurred here. After a couple of minutes of walking, Northern finally reached out of the cave into a wide area, like the one he had seen before. Except this one's atmosphere was not charged with crippled time and faint waves of lightning. However, Northern felt a pressure drop on him the moment he stepped into the open space. A very powerful gaze suddenly settled on him. Immediately, Chaos' eyes flared open, his polychoria pupils diligently searching in every direction. They finally merged back together, a faint yet tumultuously dangerous light glowing in his eyes. He opened his hand, the sleek sword manifesting into his hands. He clenched his fist around it even tighter, feeling the almost weightless weight. Using Granger and Stainless had forced him to adapt to heavy weapons and caused him to almost forget how light a sword could be, which was his preference. Northern, in his few weeks of intense training, had learned to put tremendous emphasis on his speed. It was the one thing that he could do as easily as blinking his eyes. Of course, the ability to peer into people's souls and discover their emotions had been a vital effect of his body absorbing eyes of intent. And now Windstride was also taking effect, significantly making his legs as light as feathers. What was more terrifying, however, was that there was not yet a limit to how fast his body could run. He was not yet running at the speed of light, but Northern could feel such a level of speed coming closer. On the bad end of such a great phenomenon was the fact that his stamina could be depleted completely with just a simple run, should he get that fast. A light sword was bound to ease the future endeavors of weaving an indestructible and vicious combat style. Northern fixed his glowing azure eyes toward the closed wall. The wide area was like an open semicircle. The open part fell to a slope that led one deeper into the dungeon. There were strange blue glowing grass-like plants that were faintly illuminated. Thanks to that and the small wisps of light that flowed, the wide area was not as dark as the tunnel, but was also not as bright as the first wide area Northern had encountered. Not that he cared about any of that now. Northern's eyes were not fixed on the open area. Instead, they were glued to a wall. Slowly, they narrowed to slits, their light tense and dangerous. Then he moved. As expected, his use of ferocious speed in the illusion of the Hefter had caused him to grow ferociously. His speed was almost imperceptible. With a single movement, his entire body blurred, vanishing completely before any eyes could follow. A terrifying clash resounded in the cavern. Stones exploded outward with a cloud of dust. A millisecond seemed to slowly pass by, then a figure flew through the air, crashing into the upper wall on the other side before falling to his knees like an undefeatable king. The cloud of dust that was created upon impact slowly dissipated, revealing black hair with bluish roots and tips, ferocious eyes dangerously glinting in the darkness. A thin blade that looked almost like a sheet of metal flattened to the width of a paper hummed with a soft white radiance in his hands. Northern slowly rose to his feet, his eyes still locked on whatever it was he had collided with behind that wall. Just as he straightened completely, another figure, much larger, blurred out of the wind of dust, blurring through the air and landing all in the seamless flow of barely 1 second. The creature stood on 4 limbs, but its forelimbs seemed much larger and taller than the hind. In fact, they carried its entire massive body. It was much larger than the demonic bone jaws Northern had faced before. It was nearly 10 feet tall, easily towering over him with an overwhelming aura. However, Northern had a devilish grin on his face. Disgusting. Ruffsburg really worked hard to fill his damn dungeon with ruthlessly powerful monsters. Chapter 685. The Molten Vein, Part 1. The creature's massive form loomed over Northern, its powerful forelimbs digging into the broken earth, leaving behind grooves that glowed faintly with an eerie red hue. Its elongated head twisted unnaturally, jagged teeth visible through a partially cracked maw that emitted low, guttural growls. Its body was encased in thick, pulsating muscle, the surface veined with glowing, molten streaks that pulsed like a heartbeat. Northern's grin widened by the passing second, his chaos eyes burning brighter, their glow dancing across the dark expanse like twin beacons of primal wickedness. The creature didn't wait for pleasantries. It moved, its massive frame blurred, crashing forward with astonishing speed that belied its size. The force of its motion sent shockwaves rippling through the cavern floor, shattering more of the stones beneath it. Northern barely shifted. The illusioned Hefter gleamed faintly as it tilted ever so slightly in his hand, waiting for the perfect moment. He watched, every detail imprinted in his mind, every tendon and muscle of the beast exposed to his incandescent blue eyes as the creature lunged. At the very last moment, Northern spun sharply to the side, his body fluid, almost weightless. The creature's claws raked through empty air, the sheer force of the strike carving deep gashes into the ground where he had stood. With a flick of his wrist, Illusion Sword activated. The blade vanished, becoming one with the shadows of the cavern. Northern stepped forward, a blur of motion, as a streak of phantom strikes lashed out. The creature roared, its massive body jerking back as slashes etched themselves across its shoulders and legs. Yet no visible blade had touched it. The beast's head snapped in all directions, its burning red eyes searching frantically for the weapon, unable to discern where the next strike would come from. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Northern taunted, his voice echoing with sinister glee. "To fight something you can't see." The creature snarled, its molten veins glowing brighter as if enraged. It slammed its massive forelimbs down, and the entire cavern shuddered. Massive chunks of stone dislodged from the walls and ceiling, raining down like missiles. Northern darted through the chaos, weaving effortlessly between falling debris, his movements precise and calculated. His speed was almost playful, each step landing with delicate yet commanding intent. "Big, fast, and angry. I like it," he murmured to himself, his grin never fading. The creature adjusted, its molten veins suddenly dimming. Northern's eyes caught the shift immediately. The faint pulse of energy along its body had changed. It roared, releasing a concussive wave of force that rippled outward. The air seemed to compress, and Northern felt the impact like a physical wall slamming into him. He staggered slightly. Void force had absorbed the brunt of the blow, but the force of impact still affected him. Before he could fully regain his stance, the creature's massive claws struck out, one raking horizontally and the other arcing down in a devastating overhead swing. Northern's grin twisted into something sharper, almost predatory. His body flickered, activating blink at the last second. The air where he had stood fractured, but his form was already elsewhere, just behind the creature. The blade of the illusion sword revealed itself this time in his hand, glowing faintly with its ethereal light. In a single, fluid motion, Northern struck. The blade carved through the air, its thin sheet-like edges creating a flawless linear cut that seemed to release impacts that lashed out in multiple directions at once. The creature roared in pain, its molten veins sparking as a deep gash accompanied by several smaller ones tore into its flesh. But it didn't fall. Instead, it twisted with unnatural speed, its massive forelimb swinging back. Northern barely ducked in time, the claws grazing past him, close enough for him to feel the heat radiating from the creature's molten streaks. "Oh, you." His voice rang with dark amusement. The beast's molten veins flared again, this time erupting in violent bursts of liquid flame. The glowing streams arced through the cavern, leaving trails of smoldering destruction. Northern moved faster, his feet barely touching the ground as he evaded the fiery assault. The glowing grass and faintly luminescent plants around the cavern shriveled instantly under the heat, their remains turning to ash. The beast snarled, shifting into a full rampage. Its strikes became less calculated, more savage, its claws tearing through the ground, walls, and air in a relentless flurry. Northern dodged and countered, his movements a symphony of chaos and grace. The illusion sword left a white trail in its wake, each strike drawing fresh roars of pain from the beast. But Northern felt it, the drain on his stamina. Aside from the explosive, although strategic, use of his speed, his stamina was already way below half. And now it was getting even worse. The beast was massive, its endurance seemingly endless. Every dodge, every counterstrike, every faint burst of blink and illusion sword chipped away at his reserves. He gritted his teeth, his eyes flickering momentarily as exhaustion nipped at the edges of his focus. And the creature noticed. It roared, its molten veins surging brighter than ever, its body radiating an oppressive heat that distorted the air around it. It lunged again, its claws coming down with a force that cracked the ground. Northern blinked out of range, reappearing mid-air just above the beast. He twisted, bringing his blade down in a vertical arc. The illusion sword connected, carving a deep gash across the creature's back. But instead of recoiling, the beast pivoted sharply, its jaws snapping toward Northern with terrifying speed. Even with void force, the force of the bite sent him flying across the cavern. He slammed into the wall, his breath leaving him in a sharp gasp. The creature's molten veins pulsed ominously as it advanced, its massive frame casting a long shadow over Northern. For a brief moment, Northern's grin faltered. Then it returned sharper than ever. "All right?" he said, pushing himself to his feet, his voice low and dangerous. "No more playing around." He raised the illusion sword, its invisible edge shimmering faintly as his chaos eyes came to be and locked onto the creature's glowing veins. Void tendrils surged, wrapping around him like tentacles of a living entity. "Let's finish this." The cavern groaned under the weight of their battle, as if the dungeon itself were straining to contain the forces clashing within it. The beast roared again, a sound that seemed to shake the very bones of the earth. Its molten veins pulsed brighter, the fiery glow intensifying until it spilled across the dark walls like veins of lava. Northern stood tall, his posture steady, but his grin had narrowed into something sharper, more calculated. He could feel the oppressive heat radiating from the creature. Even his aura was flickering as it strained to buffer the scorching air. Northern fixed a stern gaze on the creature and gripped the illusion hefter tightly. His eyes blazed with an almost feral intensity as he studied the beast's movements, every flare of its molten veins, every ripple of its dense muscle mass. Then the beast slammed both of its massive forelimbs into the ground with a thunderous crack. For a split second, nothing seemed to happen, but Northern's chaos eyes caught it. Energy surged from its core, spreading outward in rapid, branching patterns. The floor beneath Northern's feet glowed, molten veins spreading like a network of fiery roots. The heat surged, oppressive and suffocating, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with deadly intensity. From the ground erupted violent streams of liquid flame, arcing upward in chaotic bursts. The glowing veins exploded in successive waves, creating a network of fiery geysers that turned the cavern into a storm of molten destruction. The once dark expanse was now bathed in blinding orange and red, the heat threatening to consume everything. Northern reacted instantly, blurring out of harm's way as the ground beneath him erupted in a violent spray of molten energy. He reappeared afar, void wings spread out and lunging him into the air after he twisted away from another explosion. The beast didn't let up. It roared again, and the flames responded, the molten veins spreading farther and faster, their explosive bursts growing more erratic. The cavern was becoming a death trap. "Persistent bastard," Northern muttered, his voice tight. His stamina was dwindling, and the relentless assault of the creature's area of effect attack left little room for counterstrikes. The oppressive heat made every movement heavier, void force working overtime to shield him from the environment alone. Northern darted between the geysers, his speed almost imperceptible, but even with his precision, the molten explosions were closing in. One burst caught him just as he shifted, the edge of the flame grazing the thin air on the shoulder of his armor. Although the flame was thrown away, the heat seared through his invisible defense, the pain sharp and immediate. He gritted his teeth, his body twisting to recover mid-air, but the attack had thrown him off balance. Another geyser erupted dangerously close, forcing him to use blink again to avoid being incinerated. The creature advanced, its massive frame moving with surprising speed through the chaos it had created. Its molten veins pulsed with deadly energy, each step spreading more fiery destruction. Its jagged maw twisted into a grotesque grin, as if it knew it had the upper hand. Chapter 686. The Molten Vein Part 2. "This bastard," Northern spat, his grin returning despite the pain lacing his body. His eyes flared again, locking onto the beast's molten core, now brighter than ever. "You're not the only one who can turn up the heat." He steadied his breath, the aura around him thickening like a living shield. The faint glow of his eyes intensified, and with a sudden burst of motion, Northern launched himself forward. The beast's fiery geysers erupted in his path, but Northern didn't blink away this time. Instead, he surged through them as a torrent of black flames exploded from his body, clashing against the brunt of the heat. Void tendrils lashed out like whips as he ran, striking at the fiery bursts to dissipate them before they could reach him. Closing the distance, the illusion sword shimmered in his hand, its blade slowly turning invisible to the naked eye. Northern swung it in a wide arc, creating a long and strong strike that lashed out at the creature's molten veins. The beast roared in frustration, its molten veins flaring again. This time, the explosions merged, creating a massive pillar of flame that shot upward, threatening to engulf Northern entirely. "Not this time," Northern growled. He moved faster than ever, his void wings propelling him upward just as the pillar erupted. Then the black flames expanded like a cloak suddenly thrown. They connected with the pillar and encroached it in streams of black flames that seemed to, like a terrible plague, devour it. Northern slowly landed, keeping the illusion sword tightly clenched in his hands. His eyes fixed on his target as he descended. The teaching and style of chaos art was slowly evolving with every battle that he fought, and through the formlessness of the chaos he wrought in every battle, and more importantly, the uncontrolled destruction that lashed out through it. Northern's style was, through it, grasping the essence of battle and slowly reshaping his heritage. Northern's descent was a storm in itself, the winds howling in protest as his void wings cut through them like scythes. The invisible blade of the illusion sword gleamed faintly under the oppressive glow of the molten battlefield, like a thin light of radiance leaving the air. Below, the beast reared back, its molten form pulsing with unstable fury, its core like a blazing sun threatening to erupt. The ground beneath Northern cracked and splintered as his momentum landed him, his entire being a weapon of singular purpose. The air rippled as he swung the blade downward, a crescent arc of devastation surging forward, an unseen force that carved through the atmosphere with a deafening roar. The strike connected. A section of the beast's molten shell exploded outward, shards of its hardened magma skin raining down like fiery shrapnel. Black flames snaked into the open wound, hungrily consuming the exposed molten veins. The beast howled, a sound so guttural and raw that it seemed to shake the world itself. The roar of agony morphed into a new wave of attacks. The creature reared its massive body, its eyes dimming briefly before it unleashed a cascade of fiery tendrils, each one seeking Northern with deadly intent. The ground liquefied into pools of magma wherever the tendrils struck, forming a treacherous, molten landscape. Northern was already moving, his void wings slicing through the air as he twisted and turned, evading the deadly appendages with hair's breadth precision. One tendril lashed too close, grazing his side, and the searing pain ignited a burst of adrenaline. He gritted his teeth and retaliated, void tendrils lashing from his body to intercept the fiery ones. A chaotic dance of opposing forces colliding in the air. The battlefield was a nightmare, a storm of black and molten flames, the air choking with ash and heat. Northern thrived in the chaos eyes scanning for the slightest openings. Every movement of the beast, every flicker of its molten core, spoke to him in a language of violence he understood instinctively. There, its left flank. The molten veins pulsed unevenly, their glow faltering under the onslaught of his flames. He surged forward, faster than thought, a blur of void and chaos. The illusion sword arced again, carving through the air silently. This time, the blade struck deep, severing a molten limb in one fluid motion. The beast's roar fractured the heavens as it stumbled, its massive frame crashing into the earth, sending molten shockwaves rippling outward. But the battle was far from over. The beast's core flared brighter, its molten body convulsing as it began to transform. Its shattered limb regenerated in an instant, but it wasn't the same, no longer molten, but a grotesque crystalline structure radiating heat and light. The transformation spread like wildfire, its entire body crystallizing, becoming sharper, harder, more lethal. Northern's chaos eyes narrowed. What the hell? The crystalline behemoth charged, faster than before, its new form refracting light into blinding bursts that disoriented Northern's vision. It swiped with a claw that shattered the ground where he'd been moments ago. Northern barely dodged, his void wings straining to maneuver against the onslaught. The beast wasn't just faster, it was smarter. Its attacks were calculated now, each strike hurting him into tighter quarters, its crystalline claws slicing through his black flames as though they were paper. A sharp pain lanced through Northern's leg as a shard of crystal got in between them mid-dodge, causing his movement to falter. If not for void force, the crystal would have probably embedded deeply. He stumbled, falling into a roll to avoid a follow-up strike, the molten ground threatening to sear his armor. His breath came in ragged gasps, struggling to catch up with his movement. Northern slowly stood up, a grin forming on his face. "And this bastard is supposed to be a catastrophic behemoth," he muttered. Once again, he could not help himself paling at the comparison of both monsters. Could it have been that the other rift was weaker than this one because it was, after all, somehow manipulated? Or did Ruffsberg do something to get such insanely strong monsters? It was insane and stressful to think about, and Northern did not even have a second to do that, for the molten vein, now crystallized, was upon him again. To make things worse, his stamina had hit rock bottom. Right now, he tried moving his legs and felt like they were being pulled back by an entire mountain. Chapter 687. Strange Happenings. The beast lunged, its crystalline claws cutting through the air like the edges of a guillotine. Northern forced his legs to move, each step like dragging chains through quicksand. His void wings flared, propelling him backward just enough to avoid the claws, which slammed into the ground with a deafening crack. Shards of molten rock and crystal shot outward. Northern hissed, gripping the illusion sword tighter. His breathing was shallow, his muscles burning with every twitch. But his grin didn't waver, it never did. "Guess I'll just have to drag myself through this." The beast didn't wait. Its crystalline body shimmered, light refracting in violent bursts that struck Northern like 1,000 tiny needles in his eyes. It charged again, each step leaving deep, molten craters in its wake. Northern's instincts screamed, and he twisted to the side, narrowly avoiding a swipe that would have bisected him. The wind from the claw's swing hit him like a wall, slamming him into the ground. He rolled instinctively, dodging the follow-up strike that shattered the spot where he had landed. The force sent molten debris spiraling skyward, and Northern used the momentum to push himself upright. His void tendrils lashed out blindly, striking the beast's flank and forcing it to recoil momentarily. Northern seized the opening, even as his body screamed in protest. His wings propelled him forward, a streak of black flame trailing behind. The illusion sword shimmered faintly, barely visible, but its hilt hummed in his grip, a deadly whisper waiting to be unleashed. He slashed low, aiming for the beast's legs. The blade connected with a crystalline joint, the impact sending vibrations up his arm. A jagged crack appeared, faint but growing as Northern poured his remaining strength into the strike. The beast roared, its molten core flaring brighter, and swung its tail in retaliation. Northern ducked, the tail passing inches above his head and smashing into a nearby outcrop. The resulting explosion of molten rock painted the battlefield in a fiery orange glow. He didn't pause, driving the illusion sword deeper into the crack he'd created. With a surge of black flames, the blade's unseen edge cut through the joint, severing one of the beast's legs. The beast toppled momentarily, its balance disrupted, but it recovered with alarming speed. Its crystalline body twisted unnaturally, the remaining limbs compensating as it reared back. Northern barely had time to leap away before a massive claw slammed down where he'd been standing, the impact sending a shockwave that nearly threw him off his feet. His breaths were ragged now, his vision swimming. The molten battlefield felt like it was pulling him under, the heat sapping what little strength he had left. But Northern's chaos eyes locked onto the beast's soul cores. They pulsed erratically, flickers of molten energy spilling through cracks in their crystalline shell. They were weakening, he could see it. It was possible to kill the beast. He just needed one more opening. The beast roared, its molten veins glowing brighter as it began to charge another attack. The air around its core distorted, waves of heat warping reality itself. Northern's instincts screamed at him to move, but his legs felt like lead. His void wings fluttered weakly, struggling to lift him off the ground. "Not yet," he muttered, forcing himself to stand straight. The illusion sword flickered in his grip, almost mocking him with its faint presence. "Not yet, you bastard." The beast unleashed its attack, a concentrated beam of molten energy that tore through the battlefield like a blade of fire. Northern threw himself to the side, the beam grazing the air on his side, as void force sturdily prevented it from harming him for one beat, although the heat could not be defended against and left a trail of smoke. His polychoria eyes all flared at that moment with an intense and cold light. Using what little void essence he had left, Northern pushed himself upright and launched forward with an overwhelming explosion of black flames. The beast's beam followed him, carving molten trenches in its path. The void wings became more unstable, returning to their tendril forms and lashing out, striking the ground to propel him faster, each movement precise and desperate. As the beam closed in, Northern twisted his body midair, the unstable void tendrils on his back snapping open like a bird in freefall. The sudden maneuver carried him above the beam, and he dove straight toward the beast's core. The illusion sword shimmered, its presence growing sharper, more lethal. Northern gritted his teeth and swung the blade with every ounce of strength he had left. The invisible edge carved through the beast's crystalline chest, striking the molten core directly. And Northern muttered, "Echo!" The battlefield froze for a heartbeat. The beast let out a guttural roar, its core cracking open like a shattered gem. Molten energy erupted outward in a blinding explosion, consuming everything in its path. Northern barely had time to react as the blast flung him backward. He hit the ground hard, sliding across the molten surface until he came to a stop. His body was battered, his armor scorched, but he was alive. As the light of the explosion faded, Northern pushed himself up on trembling arms. The beast was gone, its crystalline body reduced to fragments that glittered faintly in the dim light. The molten battlefield was eerily silent, save for the crackling of cooling rock. Northern then looked down just in time as it was delivered onto him. "You have slain a catastrophic behemoth, Molten Vein. You have gained 14 talent fragments." Northern let out a shaky breath, a faint grin tugging at his lips. "One hell of a fight," he muttered, his voice hoarse. He staggered to his feet, the illusion sword fading from his grasp. His legs felt like jelly, his body screaming in protest with every step. He staggered and slumped to his butt before letting out a long and tired sigh. Just then, a new notification popped up before his eyes. "Congratulations. You have received a new item." Northern's eyes widened.
No.
"No way, not twice in a row." Chapter 688. A New Armor. Northern was certainly not expecting 2 items in a row from fighting in the dungeon. He had been slaying monsters for the past year, both in the Dark Continent and Central Plains, and could count the number of times he had received items. As a matter of fact, he guessed that those items he received in his early days were because he was not yet considered an anomaly. However, the moment he specifically stopped receiving items, he was sure all had considered him a strange happening in some way. He did not complain about it at all. Not gaining items on his kills pained him. It restricted him from renewing his collections of weapons and armors. The only 2 armors he had gained were Twilight Dawn and Night Terror. The former, he had rendered to the clone he sent away with Hao. The latter was all that he had left, and it was slowly deteriorating. His weapons, too. Stainless was a lucky gain from killing Cal. All he had owned to himself was Soul Taker, 2 daggers, and Dark Mortal. He had a couple of charm items and utility ones, but he had sold them all to Hao in exchange for this necklace that had never once left his neck. Being able to dive under the water and fight the Kirathon was no skill work, or an art and act of perseverance. Northern owed it all to the costly necklace. And so, on that note, it was a great buy from Hao. Because of it, most of the items he gained from his first rift had been gone, leaving only the strong weapons. And ever since that first rift, he had gotten items perhaps only twice or thrice, and they were not even worth his time. They wouldn't be worth anyone's. Sucking in his breath and letting it out, Northern propped himself up and managed to cross his legs on the ground while he checked what the good item could be. He summoned mentally and the panel came to life. Item. Name. Molten Vein. Type. Armor. Grade. Heroic. Order. 2. Description. Born from the depth of heat, is a will fierce enough to burn even the intangible. Order ability. Heat absorption. Fiery stomp. Northern's eyes lit up with stars dancing in their depths. A heroic armor. Night Terror was the only heroic grade item he had, and he could testify to how terrifying the armor was. Adding one more to his collection of battle wearables was so amazing he could feel butterflies flutter in his stomach. Unable to keep the joy within anymore, Northern immediately summoned the armor. Following his consent, delicate weaves of black threads flowing like sentient beings with subtle sparkles in their trails wove themselves around his body. Something dark that seemed to drink the little light around it appeared on his body. The plates were a deep, shadowed black, jagged and angular, as if carved from the bones of a forgotten god. They overlapped seamlessly, each piece fitting together like scales on an apex predator. The surface wasn't smooth. It rippled with veins of cooled molten magma, their glow faint but alive, pulsing with a fiery red-orange hue. These veins twisted and branched across the armor like living things, casting faint, hellish light that hinted at the dormant heat lurking within. The chest piece was a masterwork of malevolence. The pauldrons jutted outward, wickedly spiked, as if daring anyone to come too close. From the shoulders, the veins of magma ran down the arms, creeping across the gauntlets that ended in clawed fingers, each tip honed to a lethal point. Faint wisps of smoke curled upward from the cracks in the armor, and the air around it was heavy, charged, as though the armor carried the weight of a long-forgotten inferno. His helm was the crowning terror. Sleek and sharp, the visor concealed his face entirely, save for the faint, flickering glow of magma-like light behind the slits, resembling predatory eyes burning with restrained fury. A plume of crimson flowed from the back of the helm, not like hair or fabric, but more like liquid fire, writhing and shifting with a life of its own. It added an unnatural elegance, a cruel majesty that only amplified the fear it commanded. Downward, the veins of magma continued to crawl across the greaves, pooling faintly at the knee guards, which were adorned with jagged spikes. The boots were heavy and brutal, their soles marked with fiery trails that scorched the ground he was standing on. The armor breathed menace with every pulse of the molten veins, every faint wisp of heat that escaped its surface. Standing before it, the air felt heavier, hotter, as though the world itself recoiled in submission. It was not merely armor for battle. It was the embodiment of destruction, clad in a living furnace of despair. Despite its ferocious build, the armor was nice and easy to move within. Northern flexed his hands a bit, rolling his shoulders to see if there were any restrictions, but his hands and joints flowed freely. A smile curled on his face, although it was totally hidden by the helm of the armor. "I love it!" His voice echoed in the cave. Now he could let the Night Terror armor rest a bit. This new armor, Molten Vein, would undoubtedly serve him as well as Night Terror did. But regardless, he had no mind to go into battle anytime soon. The monsters here were too strong. My stamina is being gobbled up at an abnormal rate. It is so strange. Even though he admitted that those bursts of speed he used to break away from the Hefter's illusion were indeed a lot of strain on his stamina. Northern did not think it was enough to render him that tired in his last battle. He really almost could not move at all. And even right now, standing in the armor, his legs, mainly his joints, were aching so much he just wanted to lie down and fall asleep. He felt entirely drained. It was so unnatural. Suddenly, the cave began to tremble. Northern frowned, looking around and raising his head. The sound was like 100 thunderous steps rushing inhumanely towards a certain direction. Northern opened Chaos' eyes for a moment. Since he couldn't see through walls yet, he decided to take a sneak peek into the near future to see what was going on. As Chaos' eyes merged back to his normal eyes, a strained grin framed his face. "Oh well, my clones and those guys will take it from here." He vanished from the scene, going to rest in the bosom of the limitless void. Chapter 689. Void Summon Candidates, Part 1. Northern laid on the throne seat, crossing his legs on one armrest and leaning his head on the other. His eyes closed, subtly seeking the depth of rest, but his mind was awake as the twilight, rummaging through a couple of things. He still could not forego the fact that he gained 2 items from being in the dungeon, and those 2, a legendary grade and a heroic grade. Couldn't be by coincidence. First of all, and he had been wondering since he entered the dungeon, would Ull allow such a phenomenon as the dungeon to be? No. There's no way that bastard would do that. Northern had been able to see a glimpse of Ull's personality from how he was dealt with and through Terrence. Ull didn't seem like the kind to let anomalies pass by. If she couldn't erase it, she would undoubtedly restrain it in every way she could, such as in his case. He was convinced that the reason he could not gain items from his kills was because Ull wanted to restrict his ways of growth in all the ways she could. Unfortunately for her, he didn't operate on the principles of soul essence and did not even need a soul core to get stronger. Hence, her options were limited to that one restriction she placed on him. However, here in the dungeon, that one restriction was not working. It had to mean one thing. Northern slowly opened his eyes, their azure hue faintly glowing as his thoughts got clearer. Of course, there was no way they would build such an ominous thing under Ull's nose and she would let it be. That means she either did not know about its existence, or she knew and let it be nonetheless. Northern did not think a supposed guardian of a world would do the latter except if it benefited her will. But the question in that regard would be, what is that regard and how does this benefit it? That he had no answer to, and it seemed even very difficult to answer. The other thing, however, that one leaned on the easier side. Somehow, Milwa had managed to discover a way to hide this from Ull. Now, that seemed like a more plausible notion. However, the question of how still existed. Northern narrowed his eyes. For some reason, his mind suddenly went to the sea of crimson clouds and what he had seen. Those eyes. Even though all that were left of them were fragments in his memories, Northern still couldn't shake off that cold fear that crawled through his body. He had no idea what it was. Meeting its gaze was already enough horror. He couldn't even dare to glimpse into its soul and see its identity. He couldn't. He carried himself up promptly and shook his head, vehemently shoving the image to the backyard of his brain, if possible, completely out of his head. Currently, Byran, Jesai, Linus, Black Mamba, and Revunt, along with 5 of his clones, were in the dungeon fighting monsters and progressing deeper into the dungeon. And he was gaining talent fragments from all of them. When he became a master and his soul summons gained the opportunity to advance on their own, a couple of changes also happened within his soul. Usually, Northern could gain talent fragments when he used his clones as a propagation for soul summons manifestation. But after becoming a master and the soul summons gained a feature that allowed them to advance towards a level called spectras, from whence they become a void summon on their own, Northern could not gain talent fragments from them anymore. Because the ways for soul summons to gain achievement points for their advancement towards a spectra was being chosen by him either for summoning to fight or delegation of duty. The more he chose a particular summon, the more the achievement points of the summon rose, and when it eventually hit 100, they became a spectra. At the state of a spectra, the thread that tied to the void became a bit thicker, but not thick enough to renounce their faint reality as a soul summon. From that point forward, progression was solely dependent on the personality and will of the limitless void itself. Some values of qualifications it chose were the monster's strength and will, its loyalty. Even though all the monsters were loyal by default to Northern, he was their slayer. In the depth of their soul, there was bound to be a faint light of vengeance. For those that managed to extinguish this light completely, it chose, and for those that didn't, it neglected. Now, this was especially difficult because the spectres themselves were not aware of this light. Its level of difficulty was also the reason why, so far, there were only 5 spectres that were ready and eligible to become void summons, and were waiting for his permission, because the clones, when he merged them with soul summons, could no longer give him talent fragments was why he did not do it and decided to just send his void summons. And his void summons fed on the souls of monsters to grow, while the harvested and broken down talents were sent back to him as talent fragments. Northern could continually hear the boring voice of the system as it announced the influx of talent fragments. He straightened his back a little bit and looked forward. I should take a look at the 5 that are ready to become a void summon and get it over with once. After that, I'll go to my room, sleep, shower, and step out. Northern nodded subtly and summoned the eligible monsters. In front of the bluish-black flames, 5 silhouettes appeared, their forms almost unstable, as though black flames were molded into forms. Northern took a look at the first candidate. Name: Shard Creeper. True name: none. Attributes: none. Attributes: ability: none. Danger level: disaster. Soul rank: beast. Loyalty points: 100/100. Talent: nil. Talent class: nil. Talent ability: nil. Do you want to grant this spectra the permission to become a void summon? Northern sighed. The response tinged at the tip of his tongue, but for some reason was quite heavy. He wondered what the changes would be. He was very anticipative. After a few seconds, he eventually answered. Yes. Chapter 690. Void Summon Candidates, Part 2. Immediately after he gave his answer, a viciously thick black flame enveloped the first creature form towards the left. Northern patiently watched the sinister flames dance as though their plumes were rejoicing. After a few seconds, the flames calmed down, subtly revealing the visage of the monster as it reduced, and until it was no more. Northern's lips parted slightly upon seeing the monster. Standing before his eyes was a 4-legged creature that radiated an otherworldly, and as a matter of fact, familiar presence. Its body was as though it was sculpted from ancient stone and gilded in golden armor. Each plate of its armor was etched with intricate geometric patterns, swirling and spiraling in perfect symmetry, as if woven from the threads of a forgotten cosmic order. Its horns curled outward in magnificent arcs, massive and imposing, each ridge carved with the same ornate designs that adorned its body. Despite their grandeur, the horns bore no imperfections. They were flawless, untouched by time or battle, as if forged from pure celestial gold. The ram's eyes glowed faintly, twin embers of molten gold, exuding an ancient wisdom that seemed to pierce through the veil of reality. It stood atop solid hooves, each step echoing with a deep, resonant thrum, as though the ground of the limitless void itself acknowledged its presence. Northern was quite stricken with confusion. He couldn't tell exactly when he had killed such a monster without taking 10 looks at its unique appearance. Except it was during the avalanche of monsters, the Rift Shatter in Lothelowin. The answer came to him. He stared at the Shard Creeper for a couple of seconds and chuckled lightly. Still, having a goat as a void summon is hilarious. Let's look at what it has. Northern fell silent as he read. Name: Shard Creeper. True name: unattained. Danger level: disaster. Void rank: echo. Void ability: first shard. Soul fragments: 0/1000. First shard. The Shard Creeper, upon its reawakening and amplified by the power of the void, has become an actual creeper. The first shard grants the Shard Creeper the ability to creep into people's forgotten memories and harvest the shards. The shards can be used to weave a limited reality by the Shard Creeper. Northern's mouth fell as he read the end of the ability description. If he was reading right, this meant that this goat could enter into people's minds, particularly their forgotten memories, take the shards of the memories, and in turn use them as a weapon to weave a certain reality for a person. Northern's eyes stayed on the panel, his hand gently rubbing his chin. That can't be all, he muttered. There had to be something that happens in that reality. However, Northern did not think he would be able to see it except if the Shard Creeper used its abilities. He smiled with satisfaction and went on to the next. Name, Spirit Linen. True name. The Stars Apparel. Attributes. All in one. Attributes ability. Adaptive wearing. Danger level. Catastrophe. Soul rank. Hellion. Loyalty points. 100/100. Talent. Nil. Talent class. Nil. Talent ability. Nil. What a weird one this is. Northern muttered before consenting to the next evolution. The same thing that had happened with the golden goat happened again. And Northern for the second time was shocked to see a cloth floating before his eyes. Is this a joke? What sort of monsters did I fight then exactly? They were so many and like a flood that he did not even take note. He did not even remember fighting a cloth. The robe hung in midair, weightless and ethereal, its presence more akin to a living mist than a garment. Crafted from a dark, flowing fabric that rippled like liquid shadow, it shimmered faintly with a soft, icy blue glow. Strange patterns etched across the chest and lower hem of the robe pulsed intermittently, as if breathing with sentience. The shoulders were adorned with crystalline protrusions, jagged yet elegant, emitting a cold luminescence that bathed the surrounding air in a ghostly light. From these shoulders trailed long, spectral extensions, like frozen tendrils of mist that danced and shifted with an unnatural grace. They seemed less like fabric and more like the remnants of a fading storm, ever in motion, whispering softly as if carried by an unseen wind. At the center of the waist, a single glowing gemstone was embedded in a band of dark material, its radiance pulsing rhythmically, in sync with the faint hum that filled the air around the robe. The lower edges of the garment were tattered and uneven, as though worn down by centuries of exposure to ethereal forces, yet they gave no indication of fragility. Instead, they seemed more like fragments of a shattered realm clinging to the physical plane. Northern breathed in deeply at the elegance of the robe. Then he looked down. Name. Spirit Linen. True name. The Stars Apparel. Danger level. Catastrophic. Void rank. Echo. Void ability. All-encompassing. Soul fragments. 0/1000. All-encompassing. After reawakening with the void, the Spirit Linen, which before could possess the corpse of any monster to use as its own body, can now only merge with its void master's body, creating any form of clothing the master desires. Northern's lips curled. In other words, I don't need to spend money on clothes anymore? This was a great boon, seeing as he spent little to no effort on what he wore. This would save him a lot of money too, and also, he could literally make the Spirit Linen be anything he wanted it to be. Although he wondered if there were other perks that came with wearing it. Just like the information was limited with the golden goat, Northern guessed it was the same with this Spirit Linen. His heart now leaping, Northern moved to the next candidate. Name, Siegfried. True name, Light of Featherstone. Attributes, Way of the Wind. Attributes ability, Nil. Danger level, Nil. Soul rank, Vagrant. Loyalty points, 100/100. Talent, the Light Pattern. Talent class, B. Talent ability, a ray of light, illumination, radiant. An elf. From seeing the attribute, Northern could already tell. The one thing all the elves he had met had in common was that attribute. Perhaps this was one of the elves he killed under the dawn of Freedom Cathedral. Permission granted. Chapter 691. Void Summon Candidates. Part 3. Flames enveloped the silhouette and after a couple of minutes, reduced to reveal the person standing. It wasn't quite what Northern expected to see. It was a figure both noble and imposing. A glowing white cloak, unmarred by battle, flowed like water around his shoulders, pinned by a silver emblem in the shape of a radiant star. Beneath the cloak, his dark attire fit snugly, practical yet dignified, emphasizing agility without sacrificing protection. A belt with a silver crest rested around his waist, its intricate design hinting at a heritage steeped in valor. His gauntlet-clad hand gripped the hilt of a magnificent sword, its blade forged from what seemed like liquid light. The sword blazed with a golden radiance as if imbued with the very essence of a sun. Its ornate guard curved outward like the wings of a celestial being, framing the hilt in an intricate, golden lattice. The helm he wore concealed his face entirely, its vertical slits revealing nothing of the man within. The polished steel caught the warm blue light, giving the impression of a sentinel forged from both fire and starlight. Despite the anonymity of the helm, an undeniable presence emanated from him, calm, resolute, and unwavering. Northern did not also remember fighting this one, especially with the sword. Maybe the person at the time chose not to use the sword, because he was certain it would have rung a bell if he had seen the sword somewhere. Name: Siegfried. True name: Light of Featherstone. Danger level: nil. Void rank: Echo. Void ability: Radiant. Soul fragments: 0/1000. Radiant. After being reawakened by the void, Siegfried, who used to be an elf, has become a void elf. His strongest ability, Radiant, has been amplified by the void. Now he can create a stable sort of light using the ability. Northern slowly nodded. I see. So he could not do that before. The power of the void was tremendously boosting their innate ability, making them way stronger than they already were. Oh well, good thing for them they were killed by me. Northern grinned and finally moved on to the last one. Name: the Crimson Lord. True name: the Plague of Blood. Attributes: Blood King. Attributes: ability: Regeneration. Danger level: Hazardous. Soul rank: Belial. Loyalty points: 100/100. Talent: nil. Talent class: nil. Talent ability: nil. Northern paused for a bit. Am I reading wrongly? He was sure he wasn't. First of all, he was quite surprised because it had only been a while since he fought and defeated the Crimson Lord, and yet it was already ready to become a void summon. But he trusted the limitless void as much as he trusted himself, so there was no error in that regard. What he doubted, however, was the creature's danger level. While it was alive, he was very sure that the Crimson Lord was an apex-level Belial. He even checked and confirmed it. However, now he was seeing a different thing. Something was suddenly smelling fishy. Something that he felt he was bound to know more of when he began to conquer all the Rifts of Plagues. Northern shoved all worries behind. He couldn't help it because before him stood a Belial rank monster, about to become his void summon. He smirked smugly at himself. Darn. Just how more overpowered can I get? Evolve right away. With echoes of joy, his voice resounded in the palace. Immediately, the last silhouette was enveloped by flames and soon, the flames subsided, revealing the towering Crimson Belial. The figure loomed like a crimson nightmare given form, a manifestation of war and ruin. Its entire body, draped in flowing robes of deep scarlet, seemed to pulse faintly, as if the fabric itself was alive and imbued with the essence of fresh blood. Jagged armor plates lined its chest, overlapping like scales, each piece gleaming with a metallic sheen that caught the faintest hint of light. The armor was carved with fine designs, etched in black, that seemed to drink in the surrounding shadows. Its shoulders flared outward, casting long, jagged shadows that swayed with an ominous grace. Beneath the flowing crimson cloak, tendrils of black extended like tattered wings, shifting and curling in an unseen wind, creating an eerie contrast against the vibrant red of its form. The robes fell to the ground in sharp, angular folds, trailing behind the figure as though it was gliding rather than walking, giving it a spectral, unearthly presence. The head was encased in a smooth, crown-like helm, its surface sharp and ridged, giving the figure an air of regal menace. From the narrow slits in the helm, a faint red glow burned like embers in the heart of a dying flame, devoid of warmth, promising only cold destruction. Behind it hovered a faint, circular symbol. A halo not of divinity, but of dominion and dread, etched with jagged lines that pulsed faintly in tandem with the figure's movements. Gripped tightly in one clawed hand was a weapon forged for destruction. A massive crimson scythe, its twin blades gleaming like liquid fire. The weapon was wickedly curved, its surface smooth yet deadly, as though carved from the heart of a dying star. The central grip was adorned with strange symbols, faintly glowing, marking it as more than a mere weapon. It was an instrument of annihilation, a harbinger of ruin. Northern's eyes reflected the stars as he took in the magnifying and tremendously changed appearance of the Crimson Lord. The void had changed so many things about the creature and made it even more imposing and undoubtedly powerful. A grin tugged at the edge of his lips and soon twisted it. His eyes wouldn't stop admiring. After a couple of minutes had passed, he finally got himself enough to scroll through the informative runes of the Crimson Lord. Name: Crimson Lord. True name: The Plague of Blood. Danger level: hazardous. Void rank: Echo. Void ability: The Plague of Blood, Pillar of Defense. Soul fragments: 0/1000. The Plague of Blood. This is the Crimson Lord's uniqueness and was so powerful the Void deemed it worthy to be left untouched. The Crimson Lord can create a blood palace with this ability, in which he fills the palace with pillars that are fragments of its power. Just like it did in the Rift, Northern moved on to the second one, Pillar of Defense. One of the fragments of the Crimson Lord's power can be summoned only by the Crimson Lord and his Void Master. Northern sank into his seat. He suddenly felt very overwhelmed by power. Chapter 692. A not-so-good win. After Northern was done permitting all the candidates to become Void Summons, he inspected the rest of them through Mind's Eye. Mind's Eye connected him and Revant together. Although he could use the ability to share memories with anyone tied to him, he could also use it to peek into their memories. But with Revant, he could see through the subject's eyes. The Void cohorts seemed to not be having it easy but were progressing, albeit they were still on the 4th floor. He had specifically commanded them not to come back until they had reached the 10th floor. His instincts told him something undefeatable would be waiting for them there. And if a cohort of Jeskai, Linus, Revant, Byran, Black Mamba, and 5 clones could not defeat it, Northern had to agree that he would be in for once a difficult fight. Leaving all that aside, he decided to retreat to his room. A crack appeared in the space and widened, revealing a swirling bluish-black hole which he walked out of. He breathed in the familiar air of his enclosure, the floral scent sinking into the ocean of his soul. Northern toppled forward a few steps and fell into his bed. Immediately, the sounds of his snoring, rising and falling like a sleeping mountain, filled the room. Northern's whole body felt like it had been soaked inside a roomful of water. He felt slowed, his body felt heavy. His eyes were glued by sleep crust which he delicately cleaned off with a finger. He laid down there on his bed, staring at the white ceiling and blinking his eyes. Then he rolled over to his chest and pulled the drawer at the feet of his wardrobe, bringing out a pocket watch. His eyes slowly narrowed as he calculated mentally how much time he had been gone for. Realizing the correct count, his eyes widened and his voice let out. 12 hours! Northern had casually succumbed to the sleepiness, and never in his life did he think he would sleep for 12 hours. It was evening and was close to dinner time. I have not eaten for about a day? Perhaps even more than that. Northern had not been keeping tabs on time since he was in the dungeon. Food had not been a very core part of his life right from the Dark Continent, since they were not available to him in their abundance of flavors. Northern just ate to keep himself from being hungry, and most times did not always eat until he was very hungry. When he returned to the Central Plains, food became a routine thing. Back in Therian Citadel, they ate together almost every morning and night. It was the same thing in the academy. Aside from the usual eating time, Northern did not have times where he munched on snacks. If there was any extracurricular edible that he loved taking, it was water. He drank water a lot, especially these days that he started to work in the forge. Northern stood up and stretched hard with an animalistic groan. After he dropped his hands, He pulled off the white shirt he would usually wear to the forge and entered the bathroom. A couple of minutes later, Northern walked out of his door, his air wafting with a calming floral scent. He walked down the hallway and soon settled at the dining hall where other students were gathered. The whole place was always filled with so much chatter, as students collected their food and settled at the enormous table. But for some reason, today was especially loud. "Did you hear? A student of the non-combative school beat the disciplinary committee leader." Northern's ears perked up. "What? That can't be." "I know, right? But it is the truth. When I heard about it too yesterday, I was doubting it. But the student council was present at the duel and they confirmed the truth of this news." "Oh crap. This is going to be a loud noise. Wasn't there a bet with the duel?" "Yes. I heard the person that used it invoked something called the White Law." "White Law? What is that?" "Never heard of it." "Me too. I didn't even know it existed until they mentioned it." The two boys collected their portion of food and turned back, heading to their table. Northern collected his and quickly used his eyes to find them, but they were already settled amidst others. Everywhere, left and right, chatter about the event contorted people's mouths. "Dude, that finishing was crazy. The lightning was insane." Dude kept getting up. At some point, he looked like a living corpse. "I thought the disciplinary committee leader was going to kill him." Not everyone watched the fight unfold, but those that did had these to say about it. Northern at this point was filled with so much confusion and surprise. In all of his predictions, not one was supporting Aster's win. The purpose of the battle served only one thing: the recognition of Aster's new strength and the rest of the Starchasers flocking towards him for power. They were, after all, the core instrument he wanted to use to announce that the non-combative school is strong too. In fact, strong enough to take the Milwa Cup from the combative school. But this, he had not expected a win. A win was a good thing, but his platform for announcement had suddenly been affected by this win. Somehow, someway, the combative school would now be taking careful observation of the non-combative school. What was supposed to be so much of a shock would not be anymore. Northern frowned, gripping his spoon so tightly that it bent and writhed. The boy seated next to him with trembling eyes looked down at the spoon and Northern's furious glare. He stylishly shifted his tray of food away, also his chair, muttering, "Weird." Northern, still encapsulated in his anger of this good yet not so good thing, stood up and bolted out of the dining hall, unstoppable by anyone. "That bastard! How dare he wins?" Chapter 693. The Strongest Talent, Part 1. Northern had heard from one of the chatterings in the hall that Aster was so wounded. He almost died and had to be transferred to the infirmary. Hence, his direction and path were pretty clear. After a couple of minutes of insanely furious steps, he finally arrived at the Silver Infirmary. The academy had 3 distinct infirmaries. The Gold Infirmary, built right behind the main library in the combative school. The Silver Infirmary, nestled towards the east wing of the non-combative school, 3 large buildings away from the forge, and the Bronze Infirmary, which was very close to the school gate, essentially built for low-profile workers. The Silver Infirmary was an edifice of glass and concrete. Although it could not be compared to the Gold Infirmary, it still stood as the most magnificent building in the non-combative school. He hurried through its double doors and stopped in front of the receptionist's counter, bowed his head lightly before asking, "I am here for a guy called Aster." The lady at the counter raised her brows. "I'm sorry, who?" she asked as she opened the logbook on her table. "The guy that defeated the disciplinary committee leader." Quickly, she lifted her head and pointed down the hall. "Oh, once you get to the hall, take the stairs on your left, upstairs room 034. "Thank you," Northern responded sharply and walked away from the lady's table. Several people hung around the lobby of the infirmary. Some had bandages around their hands and neck, others in crutches, while many sat there, waiting for one appointment or the other. Northern granted them a very brief glance before entering the hallway of rooms and turning to his left, climbing the stairs to the next floor. He finally reached room 034 and knocked. A few seconds later, a feminine voice came from inside the room. "You can come in." Northern turned the knob of the door and entered. Aster was laying on the bed directly in front of his eyes, and next to his bed was a lady whose leg was hung. Her entire body was bandaged except for her face. She looked at Northern and smiled. "Did you come here to see me too?" Her words made him cringe. She said it in a very lewd and immoral manner, with her eyes glinting. Northern had almost shifted a step back if Aster had not spoken immediately, shouting, "Why the hell do you keep harassing my visitors?" She let out a smug chuckle. "Your visitors are nutsacks if they get harassed by a cripple like me." Northern decided to ignore the lady and walked towards Aster. He pocketed his hands and asked, "What exactly happened?" His voice was low, seemingly crawling with imposing tremors in the air. "I fought, and never stopped standing." Aster had a couple of bandages around his face and body. One of his hands was fully bandaged to the side, and his usually vibrant color was slightly pale. "Your words were my strength, and with how you did so much to give me this new power, I could not just stay down. Each time I got wounded, something said to me, 'How dare you stay down? Will you let the master's sacrifice go in vain?' Then it was usually like I suddenly gained a kind of strength I never had. Then I would rise again, and it kept happening, again and again, until the disciplinary committee leader could not stand up again." Northern stayed silent for a few seconds after Aster finished speaking. Seeing the silence, the chatterbox added, "Of course, if you want me to go into more details, I could, but right now, everywhere just hurts. Oh please, you are always chattering non-stop of how heroic you felt, how your body spoke to you, how invincible you were. You wouldn't stop and now it suddenly aches?" Aster threw a furious glare at the girl. She nodded silently at him and turned her head away. Northern's eyes squinted as his voice sounded like a single note on a musical string breaking the world of silence in a graveyard. "So, you were the cause." Aster tilted his head slightly. "The cause? What do you mean?" Northern had been in thought while his stamina depleted at a very concerning rate. Even though he used his speed terrifyingly, he had employed judicious use of it to save himself some stamina. But a battle after all of that and he could not go anymore. It was unusual. Very unusual. But he realized, as Aster was talking, that he had completely forgotten about the fact that Aster's use of those new abilities depended on void essence, which in the end comes back to devour his own stamina. Aster might just be experiencing fatigue from all the movement, but the use of his talent was weighing down on Northern. Hence, it was like two people were feeding on the stamina of one person. Northern blinked and sighed before responding to the boy. "Don't worry about it. I'm glad you won." Aster looked carefully into Northern's eyes and cautiously said, "Really? Are you sure? You seem somewhat pissed." "Och doi. I do, right?" He forced out a terrible smile. "How about this? Do I look happy?" Aster grinned and nodded. "Yes, you look way better." The lady, with a puzzled expression, exchanged glances between Northern and Aster, blinking severally. "Are both of you nuts? You," she pointed to Northern, "are smiling like you were a grotesque being in your past life." She swung her head to Aster. "And you, don't tell me you don't see that is a forced smile to just make you silent. Are you that dumb? Oh God, these lads." She slapped her face with her only free and uninjured limb. Northern turned towards her for the first time since getting into the room. "Who could you be?" "Oh, she's a weird one. Apparently, she is the most useless girl in the combative school." Northern tilted his head a little bit. Aster's explanation was too strange. It was impossible to know the most useless person in the combative school. Of course, if the social crowd had deemed her so. "What do you mean by that?" The girl frowned. "Don't go around telling people I'm useless. I just have a talent that is too strong. It's too strong. It breaks my own body if I try to use it." She shrugged with her bandaged limbs. As you can see. Chapter 694. The Strongest Talent, Part 2. Northern squinted his eyes at the girl. What is she saying? There was a simple way to find out what the girl meant. Without further ado, Northern took a peek into the girl's soul. Profile. Name, Josie Eresis. True name, the Titan's Reckoning. Attributes, Titan's Resilience. Soul rank, Nomad. Soul core saturation, low. Talent, Titan's Wrath. Talent class, EX. Talent ability, Colossal Force, Earthbreaker. Titan's Resilience. Even when gravely injured, the user can keep fighting. The more injured they become, the more their strength increases, but at the cost of shortening their lifespan with each extreme effort. Colossal Force. The user's physical strength is greatly amplified, allowing them to shatter stone, uproot massive trees, and knock back enemies with devastating force. Every punch or stomp creates shockwaves that ripple through the environment. Earthbreaker. The user slams the ground with immense force, causing the earth to quake violently. This ability can split the ground, destabilize structures, and create massive craters, making it ideal for controlling large battlefields. A strength-based ability, and EX. Northern had never before come across an EX-classed ability. There's no doubt about it. She's the strongest person in the school. Emphasis on strength. Except that she was always here in the hospital each time she attempted to use her own ability. Josie frowned. What? Why are you looking at me like that? Do you have a death wish? A cocky grin climbed Northern's face. And from where are you going to grant me the wish? From your sick bed. Northern's tone seemed to emphasize that sickbed. She gritted her teeth. You don't believe me, right? You want me to show you if I truly am the strongest. Well, you have max luck today because the last time I tried to use it on a bunch of bullies, over 50 bones broke in my body just from the boost of strength they received. She sighed and dropped her head. Oh, how I wish I had an actual ability that is useful even if it's Class D. What's the use of having an EX talent and not being able to use it once? He had expected that she was going to attempt to use it so he could just copy it or at least know how many talent fragments it would cost him. But it was quite a disappointment that she was unable to. How do I get her to use her talent? He reasoned for a while but was met with a dead end. After which Aster's voice reached him. The Star Chasers have been wanting to meet you. Northern's focus came back to him. Oh? They do? Why? Aster's eyes lit up as he explained. They all knew how I was. It was impossible for me, the way I was before meeting you, to have been able to defeat the disciplinary committee leader. Even though anyone would say I put no effort in except standing up and throwing lightning spears, I was still able to stand foot to foot with him because someone made me stronger. They all wanted to know who it was and meet him. Northern's eyes drifted to the side a bit. He caught the girl eavesdropping but casually acting like she wasn't paying any attention. It's fine then. When will I meet them? Aster took a glance at the table clock on his bedside desk and responded. They should be here in the next 5 to 10 minutes. I don't know if I have that much time to spare. I have to go to the forge. It's fine then. We can all just come to the forge together. Northern sighed. All right. He glanced at the lady, who continued to do her own thing, and turned his face back to Aster. You know where the private forge is. I am always there any time. Moreover, the festival is barely a week away. Make sure you train. You might have won by standing up, but the festival would be a lot more demanding than just standing up. He turned away to leave, but Aster's voice halted his steps. Please wait. The chatterbox's tone sounded almost like a cry. Northern stopped right as he was about to open the door and turned around. What is wrong? He asked plainly. Aster looked down, scratching his nails subtly and looking away. I was just thinking, there was a prize for the disciplinary committee leader position. I was thinking, since you were the main reason I won it, how about you take it? I don't really care for it. Northern tilted his head back, a little taken aback. His eyes stayed on the chatterbox for a few beats. Then he smiled and said, It's fine, Ellis. You won it, so you deserve to be its owner. Who is Ellis? Northern blinked. Ellis? How did you know the name? Aster glanced at Josie as he responded, looking back at Northern. I'm pretty sure you just said Ellis instead of my name. Northern's brows creased. I did. Yes, you did, frat boy. How old are you? 90? Ah, that must have been a mistake. You just remind me of a very bothersome friend. That's all. What I mean is, you won the position, so you should be there. Astor gritted his teeth, hesitating for a while. His voice finally came through. But how do I protect the office? What if someone else invokes the white law? Don't worry, the white law can only be invoked once in a year, and there have to be certain conditions surrounding it. Dissatisfaction with the office execution of problems regarding a certain matter, and only those involved can invoke it without any issues. You at least have 1 year to graduate, so you have nothing to lose. Astor nodded as he thought about it. You are indeed right. This is a great boon. Besides, imagine adding it to my CV that I served as a disciplinary committee leader. Every Citadel will be looking to have me. Northern smiled. I'm glad I was of help. I will be seeing you and the other Starchasers later. Northern bade his final farewell, sent a glance Josie's way, and stepped out. Chapter 695. Elena's Return. Northern strutted towards the private forge with a somber mood. There was a lot he had to think about, most of which revolved around the sudden ability he discovered. The strength was going to be a great boon to him. He was not sure as of now, but he suspected that the talent might be able to affect his stamina. This was actually the main reason he was interested in the talent. Of course, subsidiarily, he yearned for the strength it had to offer. Being able to lift a boulder with one arm, shatter mountains with incessant, crushing punches. That was no slouch of a dream after all. He loved it. He really loved the new development. What he did not love, however, and what bothered him, was how much Astor had come to ruin his plans. If he had known the boy actually had a chance of winning, or had not stupidly forgotten that the void essence he was using ate from his own stamina, things wouldn't have been so bad. His words and his blessings to Astor had orchestrated his win. That win had now given the combative school an idea of what to expect. What was he to do exactly? His plan was to use the might of the Starchasers to crush them, to show how the people they had looked down on and never imagined themselves winning against were able to crush them completely, and there was nothing they could do about it despite being the combative school. But now that Astor had given them a glimpse of what to expect, he felt cuffed, blocked, and restrained. He felt like his stage had been taken away from him. Now what was he to do? What to do? What to do? Northern scratched his forehead painstakingly as he walked forward. Suddenly, a familiar voice beat violently in his eardrums. You scoundrel! What are you doing walking like you own this entire place? Northern immediately jerked his head up, eyes widening. Elena! You are back! He hurried his steps, almost running towards her. On getting closer to the forge, her entire form revealed before his eyes. His legs suddenly slowed down and came to a stop. His eyes widened even more, trembling as they traced her entire figure down to her legs. Incomplete! Her legs were incomplete. What? Northern muttered, then moved closer to her sharply and held her shoulders and looked down. One of her pants had been rolled up. Only one leg was touching the ground. Wooden crutches rested on the short wall of the forge just by her side. Also, one of her eyes was bandaged. What happened? Northern's voice quaked. Elena frowned, a ferocious look glowing in her crimson eye. Some things, they are not for you to know. Have you been able to finish the assignment I gave you? She looked around the forge. I don't see it around. Northern let out a soft chuckle and scratched the middle of his head. Ha ha, right, it's not around. I actually have just a phase or two to cross. I will be done with it. How was your voyage to the continent? More or less. She shrugged and grabbed her crutches. She looked around the forge and stared deeply into his eyes for a few seconds. The air was silent, with the rushing of the stream and soft chirp of wind creatures filling the background like a sound from a muffled room. Northern, having had enough of her glare, raised a brow slowly and carefully before asking, Is everything okay? Tell me about yourself. Northern squinted his eyes, utterly caught unguarded. Sure. Yes, I guess? Your parents, to be particular. What kind of home do you hail from? Are you a noble? Northern paused for a couple of seconds, then scoffed. A noble? I wish. I'm from the countryside of Verulania. I don't have much going. My father is a local hunter and my mom excels at bread making. Oh? Quite a humbling home you came from. How are your parents? Northern shrugged. I don't know, here and there in the Central Plains, I guess. She reheld her crutches and stomped them slightly on the ground, moving forward. You should find a way to check up on them. Things have become very difficult and dangerous in the Central Plains. Northern creased his brows a little bit. What do you mean? Just go straight to the point. The Central Plains. A war is brooding. Northern's frown deepened, a shadow falling over his face. Is that why you lost a leg and an eye? Elena raised her head to meet his face. Don't bother yourself about it. My uncle had it worse. Your uncle? You have an uncle around. Elena smiled. He doesn't show his face around often, but he is the head blacksmith of the forge. Oh? I guess a face comes to mind. Aside from the red hair, I don't see any resemblance. Elena shrugged and slowly stepped forward. Anyway, be good. Finish your homework and send it to me. I trust you didn't do anything. Northern slowly watched her walk away, her crutches clicking gently against the tiled ground. After a while, she had gone from his view. He sighed and leaned on the short wall of the forge, folding his arms with a dark frown reforming his countenance. What could have happened? She said she had a job to deliver, only to come back with a missing leg and an injured eye. He paused for a couple of seconds. Should I look into this? He thought aloud for a moment, and then suddenly the dangerous glow in his eyes died down. It's none of my business. Bringing out the sledgehammer from the embrace of the limitless void, he entered the forge and dropped it on the ground. The hammer was smudged with gore of many colors, prominent with crimson. All he had to do was clean it up and deliver it to Elena. I wonder if she will still be going to the Central Plains to develop this. Somehow, Northern just could not avert his attention from Elena and what might have happened to her. Chapter 696. Prelude to the Festival. Northern cleaned up the hammer and later that day delivered it to Elena. He had seen her eyes glitter with stars of admiration. No doubt about it, she was beyond amazed at what he was able to accomplish with it. However, just after that, Northern had broken the news to her that he wished to transfer to the artificer course. Elena had acted like it was none of her business and she did not care, but written behind her facade of nonchalance was a lady that was heartbroken. Since Northern was resolute about his decision and had nothing to offer as consolation to her emotions, he felt it was useless trying to state the obvious. All that he had to do now was prepare for the Milwa Festival, which led him to begin training heavily. Amidst his training, he spent time in the forge, checking if he could build himself a weapon with the Rithium. Other times, he was always digging through books in the library to garner knowledge. He loved reading too much. Sometimes he lost awareness of time, and he'd have to retreat to his dormitory in the thick of the night. Other times, he usually just stayed back in the office. In all of that time, he had only encountered Annette twice, and both times they did not share any familiar greeting. It would be suspicious, after all, to find the head librarian, whom many knew was from the incident of the Dark Continent, talking to a random student. There was rational thought that everyone from the Dark Continent conversed with Annette and her assistant. They were quite a few of them around, and the combative school was more than happy to have them. They were sure that this year's Milwa Festival would be theirs to dominate no matter what. The other event Northern had to deal with was the Star Chasers. There were 7 of them, and Northern had to somehow make their talents better by copying, evolving, and returning them. That cost him a lot of fragments, but he was able to gain their trust and 7 new talents, although they were currently indispensable to him. Unlike the case of Aster, he did not tether the talent to his own soul. Since they had no issues with soul essence, he tethered it to each of their souls. But he still maintained control over the ethereal threads. Should he decide to cut it, their talent class would fall, and they would suddenly find themselves back as those weak individuals they once were. All of this, though, cost him an annoying amount of fragments, most of which his subordinates were constantly harvesting in the dungeon. Recently, it had been getting difficult for them to proceed deeper into the lower floors of the dungeon. They had even spent 2 days on a particular floor without proceeding downward, and Northern had lost a clone. Those fragments were precious, most especially because there was an ability he was hoping to copy before the festival began. Northern, with squinted eyes, watched crimson sparks fly violently each time he brought the hammer down on the boiling metal. His focus was razor-sharp, even though several thoughts revolved in his mind. His squinted eyes suddenly twitched as he was about to bring the hammer down again, prompting him to stop the motion mid-air. He dropped the hammer, sighed, and turned around. Barely 3 seconds later, Aster could be seen running towards him. Aster slowed down as he approached the forge. He glanced at the hot steel on the anvil and at Northern's face, with a puzzled expression. "What? Were you expecting me?" Aster found it so strange that Northern left what he was doing and focused right on him. His demeanor was as though he halted to quickly receive a visitor he was expecting. The only deal was, he had not informed Northern that he was coming. In fact, there was only one thing that brought him here. If it wasn't for that, he wouldn't be here. As the new disciplinary committee leader, he had so much to do and experienced so much rebellion from other members. He had only spent a day in the office, and it already felt like hell. But there were more important, pressing matters that made things escalate out of hand, so he had to report to Northern. He shrugged off the weird feeling and spoke. "Anyway, something has happened. Something serious." Northern's brows creased into a tight frown. "What is it?" The Starchasers attacked the members of the disciplinary committee that had ambushed them the other time. The students of the combative school were terribly wounded. Northern's eyes widened for a second, then narrowed back to a furious grimace. As if things couldn't get any worse. Those fools. The faint glow in his eyes disappeared completely. His hands rested beneath his jaw for a moment. Then he lifted his head slightly to meet Aster's gaze. "It's fine. Let them be." Northern breathed and turned back around to the still boiling metal he was beating to shape. Aster's almost noisy voice, although low, disturbed his almost sharpened focus. "What am I going to do? This will cause the disciplinary committee to be even more rebellious with me. I might have to leave the office before I even get to do anything meaningful with it." Northern leaned on the anvil, his eyes unfocused. Then he exhaled and said, "It's fine. Everything will pan out after the festival. Find me 2 people from the Starchasers who are the weakest. Along with you. Let's meet tonight on the training ground around 9 p.m. Aster frowned a little. 9 p.m.? Why? Isn't that too late? It's the best time. We have just 3 days until the festival starts. We need to use every time we have judiciously." Aster tilted his head. "I'm sorry, what would we be doing? A team of 4 students is needed to participate in the festival. Is that not it?" Aster nodded. "You are correct. We will be gathering our team of 4 from now, and I will be teaching them several things for 3 nights, until the festival begins. That includes you." A broad smile spread across Aster's lips, decorating his eyes with a beautiful radiance. "So, I will be part of your team? Did I just speak Spanish?" Aster raised a brow. "Spanish? What's Spanish?" Northern, having enough of the chatterbox, sighed and waved him away. "You'll never know. Just get the hell out of here and forward my message." Aster beamed once more and bowed. "Yes, master," he shouted and walked away with a cheerful demeanor. Northern, still resting on the anvil, sighed once again. He hesitated for a beat but eventually spoke. "You can come out now. It's no use hiding. I can sense you." A couple of silent seconds passed. Then from behind the garden, a slender leg stretched out. Slowly, the entire body revealed itself. The girl in disheveled, flowing red hair lowered her head, one of her fingers curling a strand of her hair. She managed to lift her green eyes up a little bit and raise a wave with a forced grin on her face. Chapter 697. What a situation. Northern was not surprised to see her. He had actually sensed both of them the moment they entered the perimeter of the garden. but the girl had quickly gone to hide immediately when she sighted Aster. He had been expecting her, in fact, but did not act like it. A dark frown settled upon his forehead. "What business do you have here?" The girl twirled that strand of her hair for a couple of seconds. She seemed to be struggling to articulate her thoughts into words. Northern folded his arms, patiently waiting for her. For some reason, that nosy, arrogant girl he had seen in the infirmary was nowhere to be seen. It was quite surprising. Their eyes met briefly, prompting her to quickly lower her head. Finally, from her lowered face, her words began to crawl out. "I heard some rumors, that you can make people stronger." Northern grimaced. "Rumors? Rumors in the end are unreliable pieces of information. How can I make people stronger? I am not Ul." The girl clenched her head, summoning enough courage to raise her head and look into Northern's eyes, although she was trembling slightly. "I mean, those guys that attacked the combative school and one met with you, didn't they?" Northern cocked his head, his folded arms rippling with strength. "Oh? So you were eavesdropping?" "I swear I was not. I just happened to come to the conclusion based on what I heard from Aster in the hospital, and although I never intended to listen to your conversation just now, I could not help but hear it." Northern's dark gaze stayed on her for a few beats. Then he uttered, "I see." He paused for a moment, then added, "So, why are you here? How can I help you?" Obviously, he knew what she wanted, but playing dumb was more interesting for him. "I mentioned before that trying to use my ability breaks my bones. I have tried several endurance and bodybuilding training methods, but they were useless. My parents even think it would have been better if my younger brother had the talent instead of me. It might be the strongest talent out there, but for me it's a curse. It's the source of my misery. I want it away." Northern's frown got real this time. What do you mean you want it away?" She shook her head, tightly closing her eyes, trying to hold firmly her trembling hands. "I want you to take it away. I'm sure someone like you would be able to utilize it better. Give it to someone else. I don't even care if I am ordinary. It is better than a life of constant pain and misery." She bit down her lips. Northern's eyes and lips were slightly widened. He had only heard of someone wanting to become stronger and had even expected the girl to come ask to perhaps help her become strong enough to handle the talent. He did not expect someone asking to be weaker. What is this? Could one blame her, though? Who knows how much she has had to suffer mentally and physically for a talent that was regarded as immensely strong but was immensely weak and useless in her hands. Almost everyone would scorn her for the weak body she possessed, and it wasn't like she asked for any of it. But the problem still remained that, was it possible to permanently take someone's talent? All he knew about was copy. Northern sighed and looked at the girl. Her eyes were sore, her lips pressed together. She dropped her face low as soon as their gazes met. His hoarse voice then resounded in the serene atmosphere. "I am not sure yet if what you ask for is possible, but I will think about it. Come back in 2 days." The girl's eyes rose with so many bright lights. "Oh my stars! Thank you so much for helping. You will not regret it," she yelled and quickly made a run for it. Northern watched as she clumsily dashed out of the garden and past the gate that led to the vicinity of the main forgery and further to the non-combative school compound. Then he turned back, softly muttering, "Weird." He inserted the steel back into the forge, waiting for it to heat up again with his eyes too focused on the forge. There should be a way. There should be a way for him to take her talent away from her completely. He folded his arms and subtly tapped his fingers in a beating rhythm on his arm. A few seconds later, his eyes widened. Seriously, how could I forget that? Northern had been searching through all the events of him copying talents from drifters, wondering how exactly it was possible to permanently take away their ability. DIY was there to tweak things, but Northern did not think it would be possible to take someone's talent forcibly. His line of thought led him deeper down the lane of the past, and Northern suddenly remembered himself doing something. Back in Sura's Rifts, he had taken a monster's name by force, not by death, and after he did so, the monster had been rendered useless. What was it again? White Walker. Northern remembered. He also, funnily, remembered the circumstances of the moment and what the system had said. It was the reason why he had not paid his name abilities any special attention until the said feature that was locked would be unlocked. However, he vividly remembered that because the name of the monster was taken away, its abilities and even attributes were taken away from it. So maybe, just maybe, it was possible to take the name of Drifters too. But I have never tried it, and what if it deals more damage to her than intended? Northern was left with a very puzzling situation to solve. He could just copy the ability and let her be. However, he did not know when next she would be willing to use it again. Now that she has come to him on her own, he could just ask her to use it one more time for it to be possible. But he would have to provide solutions to her problem or, at the very least, give her what she wants. Northern covered his face with his palm and let out a terrible sigh. What a situation this is. Chapter 698. Ungrateful Hearts. The darkness was lonely tonight. The sky seemed empty, and even the two moons sat in a somber mood, their radiance dimmed, causing the night to be thicker than others. The sound of the night was soft and almost non-existent, which was why Northern needed not to shout or raise his voice before the other 4 individuals standing 5 meters away from him could hear him. The reason I assembled all 4 of you here today is simple. All of them had a guarded demeanor around them. The air around Northern was somewhat heavy. It was almost as if their hearts could feel the tension he was exuding. The only problem was, he wasn't exuding any tension. Northern just stood there. I want to teach the 4 of you how to work with me. They looked at each other, exchanging glances and mutterings. In the silent night, Northern could hear them clearly. What is he saying? Work with him how? Does dude think he's special? All of them had something to say except Aster, who just gulped and swallowed intermittently. Northern's brows creased into a subtle frown, darting across to him. I thought I asked you to go for the weakest? The 3 of them suddenly faced Northern, their fangs bared with a feral look on all their faces. What? You think we are weak? Seriously, this guy. Don't think because you helped us get stronger you can talk to us anyhow. I'm full of you. Calling us weak just because you did a few tricks is unfair. Anyone could have done the same thing to us if they knew the trick. Aster tensely gritted his teeth. He hesitated for a moment, then faced them with palpable wrath. What the hell are you saying? How can you be so rude to someone that helped you? Simon, even you too. The 3rd boy with an ashen bowl cut looked away. Well, he started by calling us weak. If he is so strong, why is he in the non-combative school? It's like a kettle calling pot black. Aster frowned. The other guy with brown tousled hair said, pantomiming. Aster man, it's better for you to stop sticking yourself to a glue with this guy. That's going to keep making him feel like he did something special. If you think about it, it has to be a trick of his ability because in the end he is weak. Perhaps he is the kind that can only foster others' abilities. Aster's expression was broken. Cracks of sadness spread across his face. He couldn't even come to articulate a response. How could they be so ungrateful? Even if he had an ability like that, shouldn't they be grateful for his help? How can? Northern's laughter suddenly bolstered into the cold wind, abruptly cutting his voice short. The ominous laugh rose and fell a couple times before finally coming to a galloping end. Then Northern contorted a small smile on his face and said, You guys are what I needed you to be. I was wondering if I had to be breaking a couple of good kids. But I won't. All of them went silent, curious and lost by his words. He shifted his gaze to Aster. The only reason why you are here is to watch yourself, even though you know what happens when you do something I asked you not to do, or when you think you are sentient enough to make a decision in my team. You guys exist to fill the quota of numbers, nothing else aside from that. Understood? What nonsense, the brown-haired kid retorted. Rather than not participate as a team, I will just join another team. Yeah, we will join another team. The 3rd with a low cut and slightly sleepy eyes added. All 3 of them were about to leave the training ground. However, all of a sudden, their legs felt heavy. Before they could each register what was happening, pearls of sweat began to form on their faces. Their limbs, all their limbs, trembled. Despite it being one hell of a cold night, there had been no such reaction prior to now. No, this is not the cold. One's mind was intelligent enough to inform. But what could it be? What could be so oppressive that made fear creep into their hearts? And the atmosphere suddenly became so heavy, as if a mountain was about to fall on them and there was nothing they could do about it. The air was charged with a terrible sense of dread. It made their hearts quake, unable to bear so much despair that siphoned through the air, made their souls weaken, wills being bent to nothingness and thus making Northern's optical ability usable. For the first time, Northern used the Chaos Eyes for something besides seeing the chaos in the future and seeing in four-compartment views. The two eyeballs burrowed into the soul of each individual like a sword of dread piercing through a fat man with sumptuous flesh. As their gazes met, goosebumps rose on their bodies. The surrounding was obscured by a strange and dark fog. Each step Northern took echoed in it but somehow stifled outside the fog. For vicious eyes glowed with a primal light, asserting their dominating presence. And their souls were being bent and burned by the dangerous light exuding from his eyes. There was no physical explanation for how exactly it worked. Northern just knew he had to stare with the intent of what he wanted to do. The glow was slightly different from when he wanted to just use Chaos Eyes, which was just azure blue. This one had an almost whitish light burning in the depth of his eyes. It was like a light so bright it would melt metal. And that growing light was altering the shape of their souls, bending, breaking, and putting them back together, until their wills were completely shattered. You bunch are fools with ungrateful hearts. You are lucky, what I needed were dummies. When he was done with them, their trousers were wet, eyes widened and pooled with tears that slowly streamed down, faces paled. He turned to Aster and coldly said, "Bring them tomorrow and the next. I need to be sure they are never motivated to do something stupid." Frowning for a bit but trickles of sweat tingling his skin, Aster belatedly responded, "Why yes, sir." Chapter 699. The Strange Question. Northern took a very long sleep. He had been sleeping a lot for the past week, trying to regain as much of his stamina as he could for the sole purpose of the festival. He had also started taking subtle exercises. He would jog in the limitless void for 3 hours straight, covering 18 miles. And it was something he started doing as soon as his stamina training for the festival began. Being able to get the strength talent might solve his problem. But Northern did not want to think it would not come with a flaw. And finally, his subordinates had managed to break through to floor 10. He had commanded them to retreat. This would be the last serious battle in the dungeon before the festival starts. During the festival, they will be busy fighting their way down to the 20th floor of the tower. Northern was about to wear his usual white round neck top but suddenly paused and looked the other way. His pale skin, adorned with his acutely defined muscles, radiated softly beneath the white light of his room. A pool of darkness formed beneath him, and a dark flowing fabric appeared before his face, flying eagerly around him. "Hey, hey! Stay in one place." The fabric finally settled in front of him, its sleeves still flapping. Northern, distracted by it, sternly commanded, "Stop that." The spirit linen finally came to a stop and stayed still. "I'm not sure how this works, but I will just command it to come on me." Northern was wearing only fitted trousers. He was bare-chested, the necklace adorning his thick neck with glamorous grace. As Northern commanded it, the spirit linen flew on him, and a bluish light emanated as the fabric formed Northern's preferred wearing like streams of sentient water flowing around his body. The glow dimmed and revealed a crisp white jacket, loose yet well-fitted, over a plain black high-collared shirt. Dark, straight-cut pants completed his minimalist look, the fabric falling neatly to his ankles. The clean lines and muted tones gave him an air of quiet elegance. Northern moved his hands and touched the fabric. "It's like a real one. Not bad." He moved his legs too. The pants were free and permitted ample movement of the legs. He could even use them to fight if he wanted. "Is it washable? How will I take blood stains off it?" He wondered. He opened his wardrobe and looked into the mirror for a few seconds. The attire fitted him perfectly, ate and left no crumbs. Well then, to the dungeon, I guess. As he said, he walked and sank into the shadows. The next place he came out of was the thick darkness that swirled within a certain cavern expanse. Immediately Northern, casually, walked out of the darkness. The sinister air hit him like a wave of mountain crashing against his fragile body. He almost took a step back, a terrified expression tearing his face. This is terrible. Stakes rose from the ground, raising mangled flesh like flags of eerie death and destruction. A pungent smell of decay and disease wafted along with the air, tightening his chest with a disgusted clench of creep. Northern shook his head. His eyes still widened in pale shock at what he saw. The stakes rose almost next to each other and were numerous in numbers. Monsters with transparent wings buzzed above the peak of the stakes like a cloud of mournful abominations. I told you, it's a death house down here. Byron's smooth voice traveled through the dark air of the cave, meeting Northern as he walked towards him. Earlier, Byron had said something foreboding while they trained briefly in the limitless void, saying, "That place is a death house." Northern, while he did consider the Sword King's austere description, had also perhaps thought it was a little bit exaggerated. Never was he expecting a literal death house. He glanced up at the stakes. "Those bodies have been there before you guys got here?" "Yep, we met them around," Byron answered, looking up at the stakes too. "I think this place is filled with flight-type creatures. It'd be a bit difficult for ground fighters like us to deal with them." Northern put his sleeve over his nose and spoke, his hoarse voice coming out muffled. "And how'd they do? The two humans?" Byron paused for a moment, his white hair flowing freely, and sky-blue eyes radiating with a soft elegance. The Sword King was as though he was cut out of an Eastern fantasy novel. "Yes," Northern answered, cursing inwardly at the pristine grace he lacked despite both of them being born with white hair. The Sword King raised a brow. "Is something wrong?" "What? Wrong? What is wrong? Everything is totally fine." Byron studied his master for a couple more seconds before finally moving his eyes away, explaining as he did. "Well, the Lady Jessie, her technique with the spear is flawless, and she is quite malleable. I felt her eyes on me half of the time we battled. She was always observing me and learning. I'm sure as her soul advances, she's bound to become a terrifying slaughterer." He paused and shivered. "The thought of it is already scaring me. There's a glee she exudes when she kills monsters. It's almost mentally defective." "She is mentally defective when it comes to killing. I thought she had changed." "What about the boy?" Byron brushed the rough and almost unnoticeable gruff of beard on his jaw. That one is proud and arrogant. His technique is plunging, always angry, that guy. But the fact is, he is sufficient. Situations of defeat are bound to make him grow by leaps and bounds, and I don't see his arrogance leaving anytime soon. Although if he becomes a thornful bud, I can cut him down." Northern waved a bit. "I'm sure there will be no need for you to. Thank you for the insight. It is my honor to serve you, my master." Byron bowed his head. After a couple beats of silence, Northern's voice sounded again. "I have a question for you, Byron. A strange question." Byron's expression contorted interestingly, a playful smile appearing on his face. "Oh, interesting. A strange question from my master. Please ask. Who do you think is the strongest of you guys?" Chapter 700. The Death House, Part 1. A strange question indeed when you consider that I am one of your summons too," Byron beamed. "Are you perhaps growing fond of me? Is this what favoritism is?" Northern dismissed the Sword King with a terrible sigh. "Don't be a fool, Byron, focus." Immediately, the Sword King's demeanor straightened up. "Ah, yes, master." He kept silent for a bit, then opened his mouth with his usual coldness. "Well, it's difficult to tell really. At some point I thought I was the one, then at some point I thought it was that foreboding dude of darkness, then of all strange things there's the Black One's terrifying growth amidst battle. The beast is as dangerous as every one of us. especially when he transforms to a bipedal monstrosity. He paused, looking down as he continued. But one thing I have been able to observe is that each and every single one of us has our forte. It's a bit difficult to tell, but there is just one of us that gives me enough eerie feeling to be careful around him. Northern turned his head, slightly interested. And who could that be? Nighty. Most of the time, he seems to be matching our pace. Why am I not surprised? Northern smiled. Night Terror had, from the beginning of his time, been a harbinger of terror, more accustomed to the cruelty of war than any of them, and even a very ferocious and capable leader. It wouldn't be far-fetched to say that Northern himself had learned the art of leadership from him. Night Terror was his first and favorite summon, his buddy through the dark and lonely times, his first sinister friend and nemesis. Those were days of peak and ineffable sufferings. Northern sighed, shoving all thoughts to the back of his mind as he focused once again on the death house before his eyes. A dark grimace climbed his face as his eyes scurried around. Then the next second, everything faded to a cold, indifferent glare. "Well, will you guys be joining me?" Byran chuckled jokingly, waving his hand in dismissal. "That would be too much for the monsters to handle." Northern tilted his head irritably. "Are you joking with me right now? Then my death is at hand. I will kill you, Byran. Don't play with me. I would never, Master. I sincerely think your might is more than enough to wrench this place to pieces." Speaking like that, Northern had not much more to say to the guy. He knew Byran to be the most sensible and human of all his summons. And maybe in a way the Sword King was right, but he wanted to laze around, even if it was just this once. The festival was coming. He'd need all the strength he could get. But it is what it is. Northern stepped forward, rolling his shoulders as he did. He stopped and opened his hand, a little whirlwind of black sparks shimmering into his grasp. As they coalesced to form a sleek, naked sword, he clenched his fist on the wrapped hilt and swung downwards, causing the wind to violently flee for their dear lives. A black, almost liquid darkness spread out of Northern's back like a gale of wind, parting the surrounding air. The darkness solidified into a violet hue, glistening ominously with a dark violet luster under the dimmed radiance of the cave. Northern's void wings spread 20 meters long on each side and flapped softly, dispersing the wind around. With a strong blow of the wings, he was taken up into the air, rising effortlessly towards the peak of the stakes, where the buzzing monstrosities roamed. The Sword King raised his head, watching as his master gracefully ascended. He breathed and sighed, smiling. Majestic! As Northern rose to their altitude, the mournful abominations turned, all their focus converging towards a single point. Their structure was a bit strange and foreboding. First, for flight-type monstrosities that buzzed like bugs, they looked nothing like it. Their form was like a mass of human body with 6 hands and 2 legs. Attached to the joint of each hand was the root of their transparent wings, that stretched out and merged together to form a large, almost round wing that flapped crazily fast, turning into a blur. Their head had no space for eyes and nose, while their mouth seemed like it had been forcibly torn open by their incessant gnashing of teeth towards the flesh that hung on the stakes. Northern almost vomited upon seeing them, but one had immediately lunged towards him, purplish tongue with spikes snaking out and flying ahead of its head. Northern easily sidestepped the tongue, cutting it with a swing. He flapped his wings, propelling himself forward and plunging the illusion blade right into the opened mouth of the foreboding creature. An irritating squelch squeezed out with a splurge of blood as Northern pushed the sword deeper and forced it out towards the side, wickedly tearing half of the creature's head. Its flight became unstable, but the transparent wing held, even though blood endlessly rained on the ground. Northern glanced at the wings and quickly curved one wing over his head, shooting several steeled feathers into the transparent wings. The mournful bug swayed in the air as each steel feather plunged its way into its featherless wing. Then it finally plummeted down, the only beauty on its back crudely detached. The consistent buzzing of the air suddenly seemed to slow down. The other abominations that had been lurking on the peak of the stakes and watching Northern and the defeated mournful bug seemed to be taking a breather. Then all of a sudden, simultaneously, perfectly in sync, they were all lifted off the stakes by the blurring wings on their backs. For some reason, the wings seemed to flutter even faster than Northern remembered. It was almost as if they were non-existential. Northern narrowed his eyes, observing the sinking movement of the bugs. He shook his head slightly. Why do I feel like I am missing something? His gaze filtered through all of them, examining their forms, most especially the wings. Then it registered. The wings! Unfortunately, as Northern realized, the mass of abominations flew towards his direction like a flood of bugs. Oh crap!